He was the most powerful man in New York. He owned the entire city. But that night, when she vanished in a storm, taking their unborn child and a broken heart, he realized that all the empire he had built couldn't buy back the one thing he truly needed. This is the story of a man learning to love, after destroying everything worth loving. Like and comment the city you're watching to let me know how far this story has progressed. Watch until the end, because the ending will be unforgettable. The ring sat on the edge of the sink like it had always belonged there, like she'd just taken it off to wash her hands and forgotten to put it back. Lucien Voss stood in the bathroom doorway for a full 30 seconds before his brain processed what his eyes were already telling him. Serena was gone. Not the way a woman leaves for a weekend trip or drives to her mother's house in a rage. Gone the way smoke disappears. No sound, no warning, no wreckage left behind except the absence itself. The bathroom still smelled faintly of her. That particular combination of lavender soap and something warmer underneath, something he'd never bothered to name. The towel on the rack was still damp. Her toothbrush was missing. He walked back into the bedroom, and that was when he saw the letter. White envelope, his name written in her handwriting on the front. Lucien. Not Lou the way she used to say it when she was half asleep. Not Mr. Voss the way she said it when she was furious and wanted distance. Just Lucien. His full name, complete and cold. He didn't open it immediately. He stood there in his undershirt and suit pants, still wearing the watch that cost more than most people's cars, and he stared at the envelope like it might detonate. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan was just beginning to dissolve into gray morning. The Hudson sat dark and flat below. 43 floors of steel and glass separated him from the street, and he had always taken some quiet satisfaction in that distance. The higher up you lived, the less the city could touch you. He tore the envelope open. Her handwriting was careful, not rushed. She'd thought about every word. Lucien, by the time you read this, I'll be somewhere you can't reach me through a phone call or a wire transfer or one of your men. I need you to understand something before you start making this into a problem you can solve with money or fear. I'm not leaving because I stopped loving you. I'm leaving because loving you is killing me. Not in the way people say that when they're being dramatic. I mean it literally. My cardiologist has been trying to reach you for 6 weeks. Your assistant screens my calls now. Did you know that? I've been trying to tell you about the baby, about what carrying her is doing to my heart. I tried at dinner 3 weeks ago before Marcus called and you stepped outside for 40 minutes. I tried the night of your mother's foundation dinner. I tried on your birthday. I'm 7 months pregnant, Lucien. Our daughter could arrive in 8 weeks, or she could arrive tomorrow, and her father doesn't know her name yet because he hasn't been present long enough to have that conversation. I don't blame you for becoming what you are. I just can't survive it anymore. Please don't come after me. Let me have this one thing, the chance to disappear quietly before I disappear permanently. Serena Lucien read it twice. Then he set it down on the bed with the kind of deliberate steadiness that people who learned control young develop as a defense mechanism. Not calm, but the performance of calm, the muscle memory of it. Then he put his fist through the wall. The plaster caved cleanly. Pain shot up his arm to his elbow. He stood there with his knuckles inside the wall and his forehead pressed against the cool surface beside the hole, and he breathed. The kind of breathing that isn't really breathing. It's just keeping yourself from drowning for another 10 seconds. His cardiologist. His assistant screens her calls. He pulled his hand out of the wall. Blood on 2 knuckles. He looked at it like it belonged to someone else. He called Marcus. Get me Dr. Hargrove's number. Pause. Because my wife apparently has a cardiologist I didn't know about. Get it now. He ended the call and walked to the window and stared at the city below and tried to remember the last time he'd asked Serena how she was feeling. Not how are things at a dinner table. Actually asked. Looked at her and waited for an answer that wasn't a performance. He couldn't place it. The realization didn't arrive with drama. It arrived the way most ugly truths do. Quietly, in the stomach, without announcement. He'd lost track of her somewhere in the last 3 years. Not because she disappeared, because he stopped looking. 6 weeks earlier, Serena had been sitting at the dining table at 7:30 in the evening with a plate of food going cold in front of her. The apartment was silent except for the city noise 43 floors below and the occasional elevator chime in the corridor. Lucien was in his study. She could see the light under the door. Had been able to see it for 4 hours. She pressed one hand flat against her stomach. The baby moved. A slow roll, unhurried, like a small creature shifting in sleep. Serena had started doing this lately, the pressing, needing to feel the physical reality of it when everything else felt like it was dissolving. Her daughter was real. Whatever else was fracturing, the baby was real. She picked up her phone and called Dr. Aldridge's office for the 3rd time that week. The receptionist answered. Dr. Aldridge's office. This is Serena Voss. I'm calling about the results from Tuesday's echocardiogram. A pause. The kind of pause that means someone is managing information. Mrs. Voss, we left a message with your husband's assistant on Thursday. We were told, I know what you were told. Serena kept her voice level. I'm asking you to tell me directly. Another pause. She could hear the woman deciding whether the policy was worth the awkwardness. The mitral valve regurgitation has progressed to moderate to severe. Dr. Aldridge would like to discuss options as soon as possible. Given the pregnancy timeline, he considers this. The word came out carefully. Time sensitive. Serena thanked her and hung up. Time sensitive. She sat for a moment with the cold food and the city noise and her daughter rolling slowly against her palm. Then she pushed back from the table and walked down the hall and knocked on the study door. Lucien? 1 minute. She waited. The minute became 3. She knocked again. Give me a second, Serena. She opened the door. He was on the phone, jacket off, tie loosened, and he looked up with the particular expression she had come to know well. Not annoyance exactly, more like the interrupted focus of a man whose brain runs at a temperature most people can't sustain and who has never fully learned to lower it at home. He held up one finger. She sat in the chair across from his desk and waited. He finished the call 8 minutes later, set the phone down and looked at her, and she watched him try to shift gears. She'd watched him do it 1,000 times. The effort of it was visible, like watching someone downshift a car that wasn't built for low speeds. What's going on? My cardiologist called. She kept her voice steady because she had learned that steady was the only register he could receive. Anything emotional and his defenses came up like shudders. My heart condition has gotten worse. He needs to see us. Me. Soon. The situation with the pregnancy is... His phone rang. He glanced at it. A reflex like blinking. Don't, she said. He looked at the phone. Looked at her. The phone rang again. It's Rourke. If I don't take this, he'll... I'm telling you something about our daughter's survival, Lucy. The word survival landed. She watched it land. He flinched. The smallest possible flinch, the kind only someone who loved him would catch. And then he picked up the phone. Serena stood up from the chair and left the room and closed the door behind her and stood in the hallway for a moment with her hand still on the doorknob. She listened to his voice through the door, already shifting into that particular register. Controlled authority, the voice that meant business in both senses of the word. She walked back to the dining table and sat down in front of her cold plate and pressed her hand against her stomach. I know, she thought toward her daughter. I know, Mom. The Winter Sovereign Gala was Celeste Voss's annual performance. 300 people in a ballroom that cost more per hour than Serena's childhood home had cost in total. Every surface gleamed. Every woman wore something that announced her price point. The city's most useful faces gathered under Celeste's chandelier to remind each other what they were worth. Serena wore a deep navy gown that her stylist had selected specifically because it minimized the pregnancy. Celeste had suggested this. It keeps the focus on the family, not the condition. That was the exact word she'd used. Condition. She'd been on her feet for 2 hours when the fatigue started pulling at her like undertow. Her heart had been irregular all day. The flutter-skip-stutter that Dr. Aldridge had told her to monitor, to rest when it started, to call him if it lasted more than 20 minutes. She found a seat near the edge of the room and sat carefully and tried to breathe at a pace that didn't aggravate it. Celeste materialized beside her like she'd been waiting. You're sitting down. My feet hurt. Everyone's feet hurt, Serena. That's not the point. There are photographers from 3 publications in this room. My cardiologist told me to Your cardiologist. Celeste's voice didn't rise. It never rose. She wielded quiet like a scalpel. Lucien doesn't need the optics of a fragile wife, particularly not at an event that, I'm not fragile. I'm pregnant, and I have a heart condition. I'm aware. Celeste looked at her with the expression of a woman who has categorized everything and found its place, which is why I spoke to Dr. Aldridge's office directly. He agreed that a consultation after the pregnancy would be more appropriate than... Serena went still. You called my doctor. I called a doctor whose concern was creating unnecessary anxiety in a situation that required, you called my doctor. She heard herself say it again, differently. Not a repetition, a confirmation of something she was just now allowing herself to understand. How long have you been redirecting his calls? Celeste didn't answer, which was its own answer. Across the ballroom, Lucien was speaking to a cluster of men in the particular way that meant empire. Easy, assured, the body language of someone in a room of people who need things from him. One of the photographers angled toward him. He turned and smiled, and it was the smile she'd fallen in love with 3 years ago in a much smaller room, and the pain of that recognition moved through her chest in a way that had nothing to do with her heart condition. A reporter she vaguely knew intercepted Lucien near the champagne table. She watched him gesture in her direction and say something, and she caught her name and the phrase too fragile for this world and the polite laughter that followed. She sat very still. Too fragile for this world. He hadn't meant it to wound. She understood that in some functioning part of her brain. He'd meant it as a deflection, a social shorthand, the kind of thing men like him say at events like this to manage the story before the story manages them. He probably didn't even hear himself say it. But the room laughed, and Serena felt something shift inside her. Not break, not crack. Shift. Like a tectonic thing. Like the ground deciding to stop pretending it was stable. She sat through the rest of the evening. She smiled when required. She stood at Lucien's side for the photographs. She thanked people for congratulations about the baby and said we're so excited with the correct expression. She left nothing in that ballroom except pieces of herself she decided she could no longer afford to keep. The penthouse was quiet when they returned. Lucien poured 2 fingers of whiskey and checked his phone. She changed out of the gown and into something loose. She moved through the apartment retrieving what she needed. Not everything, she couldn't take everything, but enough. The bag she'd packed 3 weeks ago and kept under the bathroom vanity behind extra towels. She sat at the kitchen counter and wrote the letter. She wrote it carefully because she needed him to understand at least the basic shape of what had happened, even if he wouldn't understand it fully until later, maybe never. She wrote until her hand ached, and then she read it twice and changed 2 sentences and folded it. She put her wedding ring on his pillow. She set the letter beside it. She stood in the doorway of the bedroom for a moment and looked at him. Sprawled across his side of the bed, still fully dressed, phone face up on his chest, already asleep. He had a scar on his chin from something that happened before she knew him, and his hair was pushed back at an angle that made him look younger than he was, and he breathed slowly and evenly in sleep, the way people who run on adrenaline often do when their body finally forces them to stop. She pressed one hand against her stomach. I'm doing this for both of us, she told her daughter. He'll figure out the rest. She picked up her bag and walked to the elevator. The bus north from Port Authority ran at 2:45 in the morning. She bought the ticket under her maiden name, Serena Vale, a name that felt like putting on clothing from a previous life. She sat near the back and watched Manhattan recede through the rain-streaked window and kept her hand on her stomach and tried to regulate her breathing the way Dr. Aldridge had shown her. 4 counts in, hold for 4, out for 4. Keep the rhythm even. Her heart stuttered twice before Albany. She documented it in the app on her phone the way she'd been instructed. She did not call anyone. By the time the bus reached the outskirts of Greyhaven, Rhode Island, the rain had become fog, thick and low, the kind that swallows a town whole and gives it back slightly changed. The main street had a diner, a pharmacy, a bait shop, a sheriff's office, and a medical clinic with a light on inside that someone had clearly forgotten to turn off. She stepped off the bus onto the wet sidewalk and breathed in cold salt air and felt the baby move and felt her heart do the flutter-skip thing and pressed both hands against her ribs and waited. The flutter slowed, steadied. She exhaled. A woman in a booth inside the diner caught her eye through the plate glass window, and Serena's knees buckled without warning. She caught herself on the bus shelter post and held on until the dizziness passed, and when she looked up again, the woman was already at the door. Hey, hey, come inside. The woman had gray-streaked hair and a dish towel over her shoulder, and the particular no-nonsense competence of someone who has handled emergencies without ceremony. She caught Serena's arm. When's the last time you ate? I don't... Serena tried to think. Providence, maybe. That was 4 hours ago. The woman was already steering her inside. Sit! You're the color of that fog out there. The diner was warm and smelled of coffee and fried eggs and something baking. Two men at the counter looked up and looked away with the particular courtesy of small-town people who understand that some things are not their business. I'm Martha, the woman said, setting a glass of water in front of her. You passing through or staying? Serena thought about that question. She thought about the letter on the pillow and the ring and the bus ticket in her name that wasn't her name and the 432 miles between her and the man currently sleeping in a 43-floor penthouse. I don't know yet, she said honestly. Martha looked at her for a long moment, at the exhaustion, the pregnancy, the careful way she was holding herself. Martha was the kind of person who read rooms the way other people read books, automatically and without needing to announce it. Okay, she said simply. She went behind the counter and started making eggs. Lucien had been awake for 36 hours straight when he found the recording. He'd torn through the apartment twice. He'd called Marcus. He'd made 14 phone calls, including 2 that woke people who were not accustomed to being woken. He'd contacted every transportation service in the city within a 4-hour radius. He'd done all of this before he sat down on the edge of the bed and picked up his wife's letter and read it a third time and felt, for perhaps the first time since he was 9 years old, genuinely lost. He sat with that feeling for a while because he didn't know what else to do with it. The recording was on her side of the nightstand, a small digital recorder, the kind journalists use. He didn't know she had it. He pressed play without thinking. His mother's voice filled the bedroom, calm and clipped and utterly assured. She's going to keep making things difficult for you, Lucien. Women like that mistake emotion for depth. You have obligations that predate her and will outlast her. The foundation. The family. The structure your father spent 40 years building. She is not built for this. She knows it. That's why she keeps looking for exits. Serena's voice, quieter but steady. She's not looking for exits. She's asking her husband to. Women like you weaken men like my son. Flat, final, like a verdict. The recording ended. Lucien sat with his phone in his hand and the recorder in the other and the city waking up outside the windows and the hole in the wall where his knuckles had been and the wedding ring on the pillow and the sound of his mother's voice playing back through the silent apartment. He understood then why Serena had stopped trying to reach him directly. She had been trying to tell him, again and again. He had not been there to hear it, and his mother had been doing everything in her power to ensure he never would be. He called Celeste. She answered on the second ring, which meant she was expecting it. Lucien. You screened her calls. His voice was so quiet it was almost inaudible. The people who knew Lucien Voss knew that this register, not loud, not sharp, barely above silence, was the one that meant the most. You spoke to her cardiologist. You've been managing this situation. I've been managing you, since you apparently couldn't. She's 7 months pregnant with my daughter, and she has a heart condition, and she is somewhere in this country right now that I don't know about. He stopped. And you knew about all of it, and you said nothing. I said plenty. To the right people. In the right way. The way that keeps this family from being, I'm coming to the house. He ended the call. He stood up. He put on his jacket and looked at himself in the mirror above the dresser. Unshaven, red-eyed, blood dried on his knuckles. And for a moment, he didn't recognize the man looking back at him. Not because he looked terrible, because he finally looked like what he actually was. He picked up the ring from the pillow, held it for a moment, set it back down. He left the apartment. By the time he reached his mother's house in Westchester, the rage had clarified into something colder and more precise. Celeste Voss met him in the entrance hall the way she always did, poised, prepared, operating from the assumption that she had already assessed all possible outcomes and selected the best one. The portraits of Voss men watched from the walls. Grandfather, father, uncle, all of them holding their power like birthright. Sit down, Lucien. We can discuss this rationally. You told her she weakens me. I told her the truth. You blocked her medical. I protected the family from. She left. His voice cracked on the last word, a single fault line. He covered it immediately. She is carrying my daughter, and she has a heart condition, and she is somewhere in this country alone because she decided disappearing was safer than staying. Because of you. Because of what I. He stopped. Because of what we made her feel. Celeste looked at him with the expression she always used when she believed he was being irrational. It was a very specific expression. He had seen it his entire life. She had used it the day he cried at his father's funeral. She had used it when he told her about Serena the first time. Get out of my house, Lucien said. The expression didn't change. This is my house. Your father, my father is dead. This house belongs to the Voss Foundation, and the foundation's accounts are frozen as of 40 minutes ago. He watched that land, watched the first crack appear in the surface of her. Your access to the syndicate accounts has been suspended pending a full internal review. The family lawyer will be in touch about the rest. He turned and walked back through the entrance hall, past the dead men in their frames. Lucien. Her voice, for the first time in his memory, had an edge in it that wasn't quite control. Lucien, you don't understand what you're doing. He opened the front door. I understand exactly what I'm doing, he said, for the first time in my life. He drove back to the city in the gray early light, and he thought about Serena on a bus somewhere with her bag and her maiden name and his daughter inside her and the flutter of a heart that wasn't working right. He thought about every phone call he'd taken, every dinner he'd half attended, every time she'd said, I need to tell you something, and he'd heard it but hadn't listened. There was a difference, he understood now, a substantial difference between those two things. He thought about a night 3 years ago in a small apartment kitchen with a terrible radio and rain on a fire escape, and her dancing in bare feet on cracked linoleum, laughing at something he'd said, and the feeling of that moment being the most real thing in a life mostly composed of transactions. He had spent 3 years burying that man under the weight of an empire. Serena had left him a map back. The question was whether he deserved to use it. Marcus tracked the bus ticket purchase to a stop in Greyhaven, Rhode Island by late afternoon. Lucien stared at the name on his phone screen for a long moment. He booked a car. He told no one where he was going, not even Marcus. He drove north alone through the night with the letter in his jacket pocket and the city disappearing behind him and something in his chest that he had no clean name for. Not guilt exactly, not love exactly, not fear exactly, but all three tangled together in a knot that sat just below his sternum and tightened the farther north he drove. By the time he reached the Greyhaven town limits, it was past midnight. Fog sat heavy over everything. He drove down a main street of maybe 8 buildings and saw a diner with a light still burning inside. Through the plate glass window, he could see a woman with her back to him, sitting at the counter, and even from 30 feet away through condensation and fog, even after everything, even now, he knew the shape of her. He pulled to the curb and cut the engine and sat in the dark and looked at her through the glass. Her shoulders were drawn up slightly the way they did when she was holding herself together. Her hands were wrapped around a mug. She was talking to someone behind the counter. She was alive. He exhaled for what felt like the first time since he'd found the ring on the pillow. He reached for the door handle. And then the woman behind the counter said something, and Serena laughed. A real laugh, brief and unguarded, the sound muffled through the glass and the fog. And Lucien froze with his hand on the door handle because he realized he could not remember the last time he had heard that sound. He sat back. He sat with that for a long moment. The laugh. The ease of her shoulders in there, in that warm diner with strangers, without him. She was safe. But she was not his. He didn't know, sitting there in that rental car in the fog of a town he'd never heard of, whether she ever could be again. He didn't know whether he had the right to walk through that door, whether showing up was still the act of a husband or just another form of control in better clothing. What he knew was this: he had made a 14-hour drive to find her. And now that he had, he was too afraid to get out of the car. The fog thickened around the diner. The light inside stayed warm. Serena set down her mug and pressed her hand flat against her stomach, a gesture he recognized, one she'd been doing for months that he'd never asked about. And the simple plainness of it hit him somewhere he didn't have armor for. He needed to go inside. He needed to be the man she had once believed he could be. He just had no evidence yet that he was capable of it. His phone lit up in his lap. Marcus. Don't go in there alone. Which meant Marcus had tracked him. Which meant Marcus knew. He ignored the call. He sat in the dark with his hands on the steering wheel and his heart doing something unfamiliar inside his chest, something that had nothing to do with power or threat or calculation. The diner door opened. A woman came out, gray hair, dish towel over her shoulder, and she looked directly at his car with the expression of someone who has seen enough to know exactly what she's looking at. She stood on the sidewalk in the fog and looked at him for a long moment. Then she went back inside. 30 seconds later, Serena appeared in the doorway. She stood there in the diner light with the fog behind him and her hand on the door frame, and she looked at him through the windshield in her face. He opened the car door. He stood up. Serena looked at him from the lit doorway, and he looked at her from the dark street, and the fog between them was the same as all the distance they'd accumulated in 3 years of a marriage he'd been too busy to attend to, and for a long, terrible moment, neither of them moved. Then she stepped back inside, not closing the door, just not coming out. And Lucien Voss, who had never once in his entire adult life stood outside a closed door and waited, stood on the sidewalk in the fog of a town at the edge of the ocean, and he waited. He stood on that sidewalk for 4 minutes by his watch. He knew because he checked it twice, not because the time mattered, but because he needed something to do with his hands that wasn't reaching for his phone to call someone who could fix this. There was no one to call. There was no fix. There was just the diner door standing half open, and the fog and the sound of the ocean somewhere beyond the dark buildings, and Lucien Voss, who had not waited for anything or anyone in 15 years, standing on wet pavement in a town that didn't know his name. He went inside. The warmth hit him first, then the smell. Coffee and grease and something sweet from the oven. The smell of a place that fed working people at odd hours without asking questions. The 2 men at the counter glanced up and clocked him the way men in small towns clock outsiders, quickly, completely, filing the information away. Serena was at the far booth. She had her hands wrapped around the mug again, and she was not looking at him. The woman, Martha, stood behind the counter with a dish towel and an expression that said she'd seen the kind of trouble Lucien represented before, had probably fed it and cleaned up after it, and was reserving judgment for now. He walked to the booth. He didn't sit. He stood at the end of the table and looked at Serena, and she looked at the surface of her coffee, and the silence between them had weight and texture and about 3 years of accumulated damage packed inside it. "Serena, you found me fast." Her voice was flat. Not angry, past angry, into the territory where anger has been processed so many times it's just become a kind of exhaustion. "Faster than I expected. Bus ticket. I used my maiden name." "I know." Marcus pulled transport records. He paused. "I'm sorry. I know that's not what you want to hear right now. I know that sounds like everything you were afraid of." She looked up at him then. Her eyes were tired in a way that had nothing to do with the late hour. "You tracked me." "I was terrified." "You were." The 2 words carried something precise and painful in them. Not disbelief exactly, more like the acknowledgement of an irony too large to fully articulate. "You were terrified?" "Yes." "For how long?" He didn't answer immediately, which was its own answer. "Sit down or leave, Lucien." Martha's voice came from behind the counter without heat. "Practical." "You're making my other customers nervous standing there like that." He sat. Serena watched him settle into the booth across from her like she was studying something she'd thought she understood and was now revising. She looked at his hands, the dried blood on his knuckles. "What did you hit?" "The wall." She looked back at her coffee. "I read the letter," he said. 3 times. "Good." "I listened to the recording." Something shifted in her face, a small tightening around the eyes. "She didn't know I had it." "I know." I started keeping it after the foundation dinner in October. After she told me, Serena stopped, reset. I needed documentation. I didn't know for what. I just needed something real that I could point to and say this happened, this was said. This is not me being oversensitive or fragile or whatever word she was using that week. Women like you weaken men like my son. He said it back to her quietly. Serena's jaw tightened. Yeah. I froze her accounts this morning. The foundation access, the syndicate. I don't care about that. She said it quickly, and she meant it, and he could see she meant it. That's not why I left. I didn't leave to make you punish her. I left because I couldn't. She pressed her lips together. I was disappearing, Lucien. I was becoming someone who apologized for being sick, someone who left notes in rooms instead of talking because talking didn't work. I was 7 months pregnant and scheduling time to tell my husband that I might die during childbirth. The last sentence came out level and precise, and it hit him like something physical. Do you understand what that sentence means? I was scheduling it, like a meeting, because every other attempt, I know. Don't say I know like that means something yet. Her voice sharpened. Knowing now, in this booth, after I've already left, that's not the same thing. He closed his mouth. Across the counter, one of the men paid his bill and left without looking at them. The door opened and closed and brought a breath of cold, salt air in with it. How is your heart? He asked, differently than he'd ever asked anything. Without the half attention, without the phone in his peripheral vision. Serena looked at him for a long moment, testing the question, checking it for the particular hollowness of a man performing concern. Irregular. The bus ride was hard. I'm going to find a doctor here tomorrow. I can have Dr. Aldridge flown. No. Firm. No, Lucien, you can't do that. He knows your history. He knows I am not an asset to be managed right now. She leaned forward slightly and her eyes were very steady and very tired. I am a woman who left her home in the middle of the night in a rainstorm because it was safer than staying. You don't get to arrive and start optimizing the situation. That's the whole problem. He stopped. He sat with that. He could feel the instinct in him to push back, to justify, to explain how calling Aldridge wasn't management, it was care, and he recognized the instinct for what it was, and he sat on it. Okay, he said. She watched him, waiting for the qualifier, for the but. It didn't come. Something very small shifted in her expression, not warmth, more like the first fractional movement toward the possibility of warmth, somewhere far off in the future, maybe. There's a clinic here, she said. I saw the light on when I got off the bus. I'll go in the morning. I'll come with you. Lucien. Not to talk to the doctor, not to arrange anything. I'll sit in the waiting room. He looked at her directly. That's all. She studied him with the evaluating attention of someone who has been burned enough times to treat warmth as a potential hazard. Where are you staying? I don't know yet. Martha appeared at the end of the booth. She set a plate of eggs and toast in front of Serena without being asked, and then looked at Lucien with the particular assessment of a woman who has done this long enough to read people at a glance. There's a motel on the coast road, she said. Len's place. Clean, nothing fancy. He'll be up. She looked between them once more. You want eggs? Lucien looked at the plate in front of Serena and realized he hadn't eaten in approximately 16 hours. Please, he said. Martha went back to the counter. He heard the grill hiss. Serena ate slowly. He watched her eat, which he realized was something he hadn't done in a long time. Just watched her, without planning what to say next or what call to make after or what problem needed handling. She ate like someone who was genuinely hungry and not performing hunger for social reasons, which was the only way she'd ever done anything, and he had spent 3 years not quite seeing it. Tell me about the baby, he said. She looked up. Her name. You said in the letter. He'd read it 3 times. He had the relevant section memorized now, against his will. Her father doesn't know her name yet because he hasn't been present long enough to have that conversation. You said her. It's a girl. Yes. She set her fork down. She pressed her hand against her stomach in that gesture he'd seen through the window. I've been calling her something. It's not a name, it's just... What? She looked at him steadily. Bean. A beat. Because at 12 weeks, she looked like a bean on the ultrasound. The smallest edge of something almost like a smile crossed her face and then retreated. The ultrasound photo is on your desk. Has been for 6 weeks. The eggs and toast arrived in front of him. He looked at them and thought about the stack of papers on his desk, the reports and wire summaries and contract revisions that he shuffled through every morning at 6 a.m. And he thought about a photograph of a 12-week ultrasound sitting somewhere in that stack for 6 weeks. He picked up a fork. He ate. He didn't say anything because there was nothing to say that wasn't inadequate. The motel was exactly what Martha had described. Clean, nothing remarkable, a row of rooms facing the ocean with a gravel lot and a vacancy sign that buzzed in the fog. Lucien Takishiba checked in at 1 a.m, and the man at the desk, presumably Len, 60s, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, took his cash without comment and handed him a key on a plastic fob. Room 7. A bed, a lamp, a bathroom, a window facing the water. He sat on the edge of the bed in his suit jacket and looked at the window and listened to the ocean, which was closer than he'd realized. He could hear the waves working the rocks somewhere below the bluff. He'd spent most of his adult life in a building 43 floors above the ground. He had almost no experience of being at the same level as water. He took out his phone. 23 unread messages. 6 missed calls. 2 from Marcus, 1 from the family lawyer, 2 from syndicate contacts whose names he didn't want to see right now, and 1 from a number he didn't recognize that Marcus had flagged with a single text, Rourke's people. He put the phone face down on the nightstand. He lay back on the bed in his clothes and stared at the ceiling and thought about what Serena had said. I was scheduling time to tell my husband that I might die during childbirth. He'd heard it and understood it as language in the diner. Now, alone in the dark with the ocean outside, it landed as fact. She had tried to tell him. She had tried repeatedly, using every channel available to her, and he had not been receivable. And his mother had been actively closing the channels he'd left open. He thought about Celeste's voice on that recording. Women like you weaken men like my son. He had heard his mother say versions of that his entire life, directed at various people, and he had always processed it as her particular form of strength, the hard clarity of someone who didn't permit sentiment to compromise function. He had admired it when he was young. He had modeled himself on it. He had built an empire partly from the stones of that philosophy. Looking at it from the outside, from a motel room in a fog-covered town at the edge of Rhode Island, it looked different. It looked like the ideology of a woman who had confused control with love so early and so completely that she could no longer distinguish between them. He closed his eyes. He thought about Serena's hand on her stomach, about Bean, who looked like a bean at 12 weeks, about a photograph on his desk that had been there for 6 weeks. He slept for 3 hours. He dreamed about nothing. That was unusual. Well, the clinic opened at 8. Lucien was in the parking lot at 7:55. He was wearing jeans and a gray shirt he'd bought from a gas station on the coast road because his suit was wrinkled beyond function and he'd needed something that didn't announce what he was. The jeans were stiff and the shirt was wrong, but it was less conspicuous. Serena arrived at 8:03 with Martha beside her, which told Lucien that Martha had already assumed a protective function and was not pretending otherwise. She looked at him in the parking lot with the same measured assessment she'd used in the diner, and she looked at Serena, and Serena looked at Lucien and then at Martha. I'll be fine, Serena said to Martha. I know you will. Martha looked at Lucien once more. Coffee's on until noon. She left. They went inside. The clinic was small, waiting room with 8 chairs, a reception desk, the smell of antiseptic, and the particular quiet of a place that handles genuine emergencies without the volume of a city hospital. A woman at the reception desk looked up at them with the professional warmth of someone accustomed to people arriving worried. I need to see a doctor, Serena said. I'm 30 weeks pregnant and I have a pre-existing cardiac condition. I've been traveling and I need an assessment. Of course. The woman reached for paperwork. Do you have your medical records? On my phone, I can email them. Lucien sat in a chair by the window. That was all. He sat. He was aware of Serena watching him not interfere. He focused on the window and the parking lot and the thin strip of gray ocean visible at the end of the street and he sat on his hands metaphorically and let her handle it. She was taken back within 20 minutes. He stayed in the waiting room. A man came in at 8:30 with a cut on his forearm wrapped in a dish towel. A woman came in with a child who had an ear infection that was making the child extremely vocal about its displeasure. Lucien read a fishing magazine from 2 years ago without absorbing any of it. At 9:45, a man in his 50s with a slightly rumpled look that suggested he hadn't been expecting a complex case this early came out to the waiting room and looked at Lucien. Yen. You're with Serena Vale? Yes? Dr. Elias Mercer. He didn't offer his hand. He was reading Lucien the way country doctors read people, looking for what they're not saying. She's stable. The cardiac issue hasn't acutely worsened from travel. I'd like to set up regular monitoring while she's here. She told me she's not sure how long she's staying. That's her decision. Mercer looked at him for a moment. She asked me to give you that update. That's the extent of the briefing. Understood. Mercer went back. Lucien sat. She came out at 10:15. She looked tired, but the particular tight quality around her eyes had loosened slightly. The relief of having handed a medical situation to a competent person and been told not immediately catastrophic. He knew that look. He'd seen it after difficult meetings when the outcome was survivable. Okay? He asked. He wants weekly monitoring. He's setting up a portable cardiac monitor. She sat in the chair beside him, not across the room, not next to him exactly, one chair away, in the particular geometry of proximity that isn't closeness but isn't distance either. He said the baby looks good. Good. He's a widower, been here 15 years, trained at Johns Hopkins, which I did not expect. She said this partly to herself, in the way people file information when they're deciding whether to trust a place. He said Greyhaven has a hospital 40 minutes north if it comes to that. It won't. She looked at him sideways. You don't know that. No. He caught himself. No, I don't. I'm sorry. She studied him again with that evaluating attention. He was beginning to understand it wasn't suspicion exactly. It was calibration. She was recalibrating constantly, taking measurements, checking whether what she saw matched what she remembered. They walked out into the pale morning together, not touching. He stayed. There was no formal decision made about this, no conversation where they agreed to terms. He was simply still in Greyhaven the next morning and the morning after that. He moved from the motel into a 2-room rental above the hardware store that Len's cousin managed, paying cash by the week. He ate breakfast most mornings at Martha's diner, usually at the counter, usually alone, sometimes across the diner from Serena, who came in later. The town noticed him the way small towns notice additions. Curious, not hostile. The story they assembled for themselves was probably mostly accurate. A man who had done something wrong, trying to do something right, in a place where no one had any reason to extend him particular deference. He found that he didn't mind the absence of deference. That was new. He helped Martha carry supply boxes from a delivery truck on the 3rd day, not because anyone asked him to, but because he was standing there when they arrived and his hands were empty and the boxes needed moving. Martha said nothing about it. He said nothing about it. The boxes got moved. He called Marcus twice a day, once in the morning, once in the evening, and handled what needed handling by phone. The empire was fraying without his physical presence. Rourke was moving into territory that had been Voss held for 11 years. 3 lieutenants were restless. 2 politicians who had relied on Voss infrastructure for campaign financing were making quiet noises about alternative arrangements. He handled it from a rental above a hardware store in Rhode Island. It felt like trying to hold the ocean with both hands. On the 6th day, Sheriff Naomi Reed knocked on his door. She was perhaps 45, with the kind of physical stillness that law enforcement people sometimes develop. Not relaxed, just economical. She wore her badge like she'd forgotten it was there, which meant she wore it all the time. Sheriff Reed. She didn't offer her hand. She looked at him from the doorway with the flat professional assessment of someone who has run background checks and is confirming what they found. Come in, he said. I'll stand. She glanced past him into the apartment, taking inventory. You're Lucien Voss. Yes. I know what that name means. Probably. The woman at the diner, the pregnant woman. She came here to get away from something. Reed looked at him directly. I want to understand if that something is you. He thought about how to answer that honestly. Both, he said finally. She came here to get away from what I'd become. I came here hoping to be something different. That's a nice sentence. It's the truth. Men like you have lawyers who make truth sound nice. She said it without particular heat, just fact. I've had 2 conversations with Serena Vale in the past week. She hasn't asked for protection. She hasn't indicated threat. So I'm not here in an enforcement capacity. A pause. I'm here because this is a small town, and she's become part of it faster than you have, and I want you to understand that. I understand it. She's got people here now, Martha, Elias Mercer, me, if it comes to that. She held his gaze. Whatever you're trying to fix, you fix it without making her feel trapped. The moment she feels trapped, this becomes a different kind of conversation. Agreed. Reed looked at him for another moment. Then she nodded, once, the way people nod when they've said what they came to say and consider the matter filed. She left. Lucien stood at the window and watched her cruiser pull out and thought that he had been assessed and dismissed by more powerful people in more significant rooms, and none of it had felt quite as final as that. He was making progress. Slow, unmistakable, fragile progress. Serena began acknowledging him in the diner with more than the minimal courtesy required by proximity. She told him about the baby's movements, how strong they'd become, how the kicking had a pattern now, mornings mostly. She showed him once what that looked like from the outside, pressing his hand briefly to her side without preamble and then removing it when the movement stopped, and the whole event lasted perhaps 8 seconds, and he thought about it for the rest of the day. Dr. Mercer ran the cardiac monitoring twice and reported that while the condition remained serious, it was holding stable. He said it with the measured optimism of a man who has learned not to promise outcomes. Lucien listened to that lesson carefully. He stopped taking half the calls from New York. The ones that could wait, waited. The ones that couldn't, he handled in 30 minutes and ended. He was learning, slowly and against every instinct, how to let things be unresolved. Then on the 14th morning, he found the rattle. He was walking back from the hardware store when he passed the diner and saw Serena standing in the doorway with something in her hands, small and silver. She was holding it at arm's length like she was trying to keep it away from herself. He walked over. It was a baby rattle, silver-plated, the kind that was decorative more than functional, the kind given as gifts at showers. It was wrapped in black ribbon. He took it from her because she was holding it with fingers that were going pale from the grip. No note, no card, nothing inside the ribbon. He turned it over. On the base, barely visible, a small engraving, V.V. Voss. Someone knew exactly where she was. He looked at Serena's face. She was doing the controlled breathing thing. 4 in, hold, 4 out. And her eyes were very still in the way that meant she was managing a response that wanted to be much larger. Who knows you're here? He asked. No one. I used your maiden name. I know. He looked at the rattle. Someone tracked you through me. Or through you being here. Her voice was steady, but her hands were not. Lucien, who? Rourke. He said the name with the flatness of certainty. Or someone working for him. Why? Because I weakened the syndicate when I cut my mother out and left New York. Because the structure that kept Rourke contained required my presence, and I walked away. He turned the rattle over again. The engraving was deliberate, VV, not a threat to him. A message through her. He's not coming after me. He's showing me he can come after this. Serena stared at the rattle. Our daughter. Yes. And he watched her face go through something that no amount of armor, his or hers, could have prepared either of them for. Not fear exactly. Fear was a thing you could fight. This was the look of someone realizing that the world she had built carefully around herself in the past 2 weeks, the small world of Martha and Dr. Mercer and Sheriff Reed and morning fog and the smell of salt air, was not actually separate from the world she had fled. It had only ever been the same world, temporarily out of sight. She looked at him. And for the first time since he'd arrived in Greyhaven, what he saw in her face was not exhaustion or distance or the careful calibration of someone deciding how much to trust. What he saw was something rawer than all of that. She was afraid. Not of him, of what following him had cost her. "Tell me what to do," he said. She looked at the rattle in his hands, and her jaw was set, and her eyes were wet in a way that she was not going to permit to become crying. Not here on the sidewalk, not in front of him, not yet. "Tell me what you want," he said differently. "Not what I should arrange. What do you want?" The question hung between them. He had never asked her that question. Not like this, not where the answer was the only thing that mattered, and there was no efficiency calculation running underneath it. He had spent 3 years asking what needed to be done and arranging the answer before she could respond. She looked at him for a long time. "I want her to be safe," she said. "That's all. That's the only thing." "Okay." He held the rattle. "Then I need to do something, and I need you to understand that doing it means undoing everything I've spent 15 years building." She heard what he was saying. He watched her hear it. "What does that mean?" she asked. "It means I give the federal investigators what they've been trying to get for 4 years. He looked at the engraving on the rattle base. "It means I take Rourke down the way that makes him unable to get back up. It means the entire structure comes apart, including the parts that protect me." "You'd go to prison." "Maybe. I have lawyers, but yes, maybe." She was very still. "The alternative," he said, "is I fight Rourke the way I've always fought. Which means this town gets touched by something it never should have been near. Which means He stopped. He couldn't finish the sentence. "I won't do that. Not to her. Not to you." Serena looked at him with those measuring eyes, and this time what she was measuring was different than before. She wasn't checking for hollow performance. She was looking at the actual structure of him, the thing underneath the armor, and the money, and the learned brutality. And she was trying to determine whether what she found there was capable of what he was describing. He let her look. He had nothing left to hide behind anyway. She reached out and took the rattle from his hands. She turned it over once and looked at the engraving, and then she closed her hand around it and held it. And that gesture, closing her hand around the threat instead of flinching away from it, told him something about her that he had apparently... She was still holding the rattle when he made the first call. He walked 20 feet down the sidewalk. Not far, not out of sight, but enough to give the conversation the separation it required. And he dialed a number he had memorized 4 years ago and never used. The kind of number you keep the way you keep an emergency exit, present, undesirable, the last option before the building burns. Special Agent Dana Cross, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Organized Crime Division. She picked up on the third ring. "This is Voss." He said it without preamble. "I want a conversation." A pause. He heard her adjust in her chair. He could picture the office, the organized chaos of federal investigators who had been running a case long enough that it had become furniture. "I've been waiting for this call for 4 years, Mr. Voss." "Don't make it sentimental. I'll contact you through my attorney within 48 hours. I need certain guarantees in place before I provide anything." "What kind of guarantees?" "Immunity structure for full cooperation. Protection for 2 people not named in any current proceeding. And Rourke." He looked back at Serena, standing in the diner doorway, still holding the silver rattle. "I want Rourke specifically handled before I give you the rest. Not arrested, neutralized. Syndicate, assets, network, all of it. Rourke is already on our radar." "Your radar and my intelligence are different instruments. You have his name, I have his architecture." He paused. "Do we have a preliminary understanding?" Another pause. Longer. The sound of a woman deciding whether to believe she was actually getting what she'd spent 4 years trying to build. "Get me your attorney's number," Cross said. "I'll have a framework ready in 24 hours. He hung up. He walked back to Serena. She was watching him with the particular attention of someone who has just witnessed a door close that cannot be reopened. "It started," he said. She looked at the rattle in her hand. Then she looked at him. "How long?" "Days. Maybe a week. The federal piece needs to be structured before anything moves." He looked at the engraving. VV. Someone had sent this deliberately, which meant someone had been watching the town long enough to know Serena was here, which meant the 48-hour window he'd given Cross was optimistic. "We need to move you." Move me where? Somewhere inside the town. Different address, fewer windows, Martha's back rooms, or I'm not going to hide in a back room. Serena, I am 30 weeks pregnant, and I have a cardiac monitor, and I see Dr. Mercer twice a week. She said each item like setting down weight. I am not rearranging the one stable thing I have because Adrian Rourke sent a rattle. That's exactly what it's designed to make me do. He stopped. She was right. He knew she was right, and the fact that she could see the tactical logic through what she was feeling told him something about her that he kept relearning in different forms. Then we tell Reed, he said. Yes. She handed him the rattle. We tell Reed, and you tell me everything about Rourke that I should know. You don't want that information. I want to make informed decisions about my own safety. Her voice had an edge in it, not anger, precision. That requires information. Don't decide what I can handle. He held her gaze. Okay, he said. Okay. Reed took the rattle in a gloved hand and turned it under the light in her office and said nothing for a while. Her office had the organized austerity of someone who took their work seriously without performing seriousness. Files stacked but not displayed, a coffee cup with a ring stain she hadn't bothered to wipe, a photograph on the desk facing away from visitors. VV, she said. Voss, it's a message to me through her location. You know who sent it? Adrian Rourke. He controls the Eastern Seaboard distribution network that my family's syndicate has been in competition with for 11 years. When I left New York, he moved into vacuum territory. This, he nodded at the rattle, is him demonstrating that the vacuum hasn't made him cautious. It's made him comfortable. Reed set the rattle down on her desk. You brought your war here. I know. That's not a small thing, Mr. Voss. I know what it is. She looked at Serena, who was sitting in the other chair with her hands in her lap and her posture very controlled. Are you in immediate danger? I don't know, Serena said honestly. He doesn't think so. I don't think so. But I didn't think this town was findable either. Every town is findable. Reed picked up a pen. I can increase drive-bys on this block and the clinic. I can reach out to state police for a discreet flag on the address. She looked at Lucien. And you're doing what? Federal contact is already made. 48 hours to a framework. Reed looked at him for a long moment. She was putting something together. He could see the calculation moving behind her eyes. You're burning the whole thing down. That's the plan. Does Rourke know that's the plan? The question landed with more weight than he'd expected. He thought about it. He knows I've been here 2 weeks. He knows I've been quiet. He probably thinks I'm regrouping. He paused. He doesn't know about Cross. Yet, Reed said simply. The single word sat in the room, and Lucien thought about the 48-hour window and whether it was actually 48 hours or whether there was a leak somewhere in the chain between him and Cross that he hadn't accounted for. He thought about who knew he'd left New York. Marcus. The motel owner. Martha, by proximity. The family lawyer who had been briefed on Celeste's account freeze. He thought about Marcus. He pushed the thought down. I'll handle my timeline, he said. You handle yours. Reed looked at him with the flat, steady gaze of a woman who has heard that sentence from men like him before and knows exactly how often it held. I'll handle mine, she agreed, which was not the same as agreeing with him. The call from his attorney came the next morning at 7:15. Gerald Fenn, 62, Yale Law, who had been managing Voss family legal infrastructure for 23 years and had the particular composure of a man who had stood between powerful people and their consequences so long that the position had become his natural posture. Cross's office sent preliminary terms, Fenn said. They're aggressive. How aggressive? They want the full network. Trafficking routes, financial instruments, political contacts, the Rourke operation architecture. Everything. In exchange, full immunity for you on the conspiracy and racketeering exposure, limited immunity on the financial charges pending cooperation quality. A pause. They're not offering protection on the money laundering. That's 18 to 24 with good behavior. What are they offering on the 2 civilians? Identity sealing and relocation assistance, not witness protection. Different tier. It means they're protected from public record but not actively monitored by federal marshals. That's not enough. Lucien, for Serena, it's not enough. She's pregnant, she has a medical condition, she needs real infrastructure, not a sealed file. The alternative is you don't cooperate, and Rourke operates freely, and your daughter grows up with a target on her back that federal paperwork can't. I understand the alternative. He was standing at the window of the hardware store rental, looking at the main street of Greyhaven, which was just beginning to take on the ordinary morning activity of a small town. A delivery truck, a woman with a dog, the diner sign flickering on. Go back to Cross. Full witness protection tier for Serena Vale and the child. That's non-negotiable. Everything else I can work with. She'll push back. Tell her I have Marcus Hale's call logs from the past 3 months. He said it very quietly. Tell her that's a preview. A long silence. What am I going to find in those call logs, Lucy? Fen. He hadn't told Fen yet. Hadn't said it out loud to anyone. He'd been carrying it since the previous night when he'd pulled Marcus's encrypted records on a hunch that had started as a small wrong feeling and ended as something that took the floor out from under him. Tell her I have them, he said. She'll understand. He ended the call. He sat with his phone in his hand and stared at the main street and thought about Marcus Hale, who had been his right hand for 9 years, who had run interference, managed logistics, screened calls, coordinated operations, who had been, in every functional sense, the second brain of the Voss operation, who had called in Adrian Rourke's cell number 17 times in the past 90 days. The first call was 4 days after Lucien left New York. The last call was 36 hours ago, 1 day before the rattle arrived. He drove to New York that afternoon. He didn't tell Serena where he was going. He told her he had business to handle, which was true, and that he would be back within 24 hours, which he intended to be true. He told Sheriff Reed as a courtesy. Reed said nothing, just wrote something in her notebook, which meant she was documenting the timeline. Good. He wanted a record. The drive took 4.5 hours. He spent most of it reconstructing the timeline in his head. Marcus had access to Serena's bus ticket records. Lucien had asked him to pull them the morning she left, which meant Marcus had known she was in Greyhaven at the same time Lucien did, possibly before, depending on when he'd passed the information. 17 calls, the first 4 days after departure. The rattle 36 hours after the last call. It was clean and it was terrible, and it had the particular shape of a betrayal that had been building for a long time before the person being betrayed was paying attention. Marcus was waiting in the Voss Tower offices when Lucien arrived. He was standing at the window in the particular posture of a man who has been told his employer is coming and has decided that looking like he's been waiting calmly is preferable to looking like he's been waiting anxiously. He turned when Lucien came through the door. You're back. Briefly. Lucien set his phone on the desk between them, screen up, the call log visible. Marcus's name in the outgoing column 17 times, the Rourke number listed beside each one. He watched Marcus look at it. Watched the very small, very fast calculation that moved across Marcus's face. Not panic, something more controlled than panic. The instinctive maneuver of a man deciding which version of the truth to deploy. Lucien, when did he approach you? Marcus looked at the phone. He was a compact man, mid-40s, the kind of physically unremarkable person whose value had always been in his ability to move through rooms without being assessed. He had a quality of absolute reliability that Lucien had trusted without examination for 9 years. He had the distinct expression now of someone watching a structure they have spent years inhabiting begin to come apart at the joints. After your father died, Marcus said. Lucien went very still. Rourke made contact 8 years ago. He wasn't asking for active cooperation. He wanted information, occasionally. Nothing that affected operations directly. Marcus held his gaze. It started small. It started with my father's death. Your father was already... Answer the question. Yes. Flat. After the funeral, Rourke's intermediary reached out. He stopped. Something moved across his face that might have been the beginning of a justification and then was swallowed. I was in a position where I owed a debt, before you and I had our arrangement. It predates you. A debt to Rourke, to someone in Rourke's network. The debt transferred. Lucien looked at him for a long time without speaking. The city moved behind the floor-to-ceiling glass, indifferent, continuous. The same city that had been running its particular machinery while Marcus Hale fed information to his rival for 8 years. "The rattle," Lucien said. "You told him she was in Greyhaven." "I gave him a location. I didn't—" Marcus stopped. The sentence had no clean ending, and he knew it. "I didn't know what he'd do with it." "You knew exactly what he'd do with it." Lucien's voice had dropped into the quiet register that meant the worst, and Marcus heard it, and something in his posture shifted, a very subtle physical acknowledgement that the conversation had entered a territory where outcomes were uncertain. "You've been feeding him information for 8 years. You know how he operates. A location with a pregnant woman attached to it." He stopped himself. He could feel the old thing rising in him, the efficient violence that was the Voss family's particular inheritance, the response that solved problems by removing the people who created them. He felt it the way you feel a wave before it hits, the pressure of it, the displacement of water. What did you expect him to do? "I thought he wanted to use her as leverage, to get you back to the table. Not what?" Marcus looked at the phone. He looked back at Lucien. "There are people in Rourke's organization who don't operate the way Rourke operates. He doesn't always control the response once he gives the location." The sentence fell into the room, and Lucien heard it, and for approximately 3 seconds, the world was very simple and very red, and he understood completely what he was capable of. Then he thought of Serena in the diner doorway saying, "Don't become that man again." He hadn't said it yet. She hadn't said it yet. It was still weeks away. The hurricane was still weeks away. The birth was still weeks away. But he heard it anyway, in some future-facing part of him that was trying very hard to be something other than what his hands wanted to be. He picked up his phone. He put it in his pocket. "Get out of the building," he said. Marcus blinked. "Lucien, I'm calling Cross in 10 minutes. Your name is going to be in that conversation. Whether it's in the cooperation section or the intelligence section depends on whether you're standing here when I make the call." He looked at him once. "Get out of the building, Marcus. That's the last thing I'm going to do for you." Marcus looked at him for a moment with the expression of a man who has been many things in his life and is not entirely sure what he is now. Then he picked up his jacket from the chair back. He walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame. "For what it's worth," he said, "I never thought it would reach her." "I know," Lucien said. "That's why you're leaving instead of the alternative." Marcus left. Lucien stood alone in the office that had been the center of his operational life for over a decade. Everything was exactly as he'd left it. The desk, the files, the secure phone system, the view of the city that had always felt like confirmation of something. He looked at the desk and the stack of papers on the right side, and he thought about a 12-week ultrasound photograph somewhere in that stack, and he walked to the desk and went through it carefully until he found it. A small printed image. Gray and white and blurry, the way all of them were. The particular blurry quality that required someone to tell you what you were looking at, and then once you were told you couldn't unsee it. A small curved shape. A large head. The unmistakable C of a fetus in its natural position. Written in Serena's handwriting in the white margin at the bottom, Bean, 12 weeks, November 4th. He had been sitting at this desk on November 4th. He could not have told you what he'd been working on. He had shuffled this photograph into a stack of documents and continued working. He held it for a long moment. Then he put it carefully in his jacket pocket next to the letter, and he called Cross. Cross had the witness protection tier approved within 6 hours. The call logs Lucien provided on Marcus were apparently sufficient justification. The agent's voice had a quality of contained excitement that professionals use to mask the fact that they are receiving the thing they have been working toward for years. She walked him through the cooperation structure with the speed of someone who had been holding this framework ready and was relieved to finally deploy it. The immunity deal covered the racketeering and conspiracy exposure. The financial charges were reduced to civil penalties with a compliance monitor. He would not see prison time if cooperation was complete and verifiable. She said it with the caveat of someone who had done this before. Complete and verifiable. She wanted the architecture. Names, accounts, routes, contact networks, political relationships. She wanted the map of the thing that no external investigation had been able to fully chart. He said he understood. He said he would send Fenn the full inventory within 72 hours. He drove back to Greyhaven through the night. He got in at 3 in the morning and stood in the parking lot of Len's Motel for a moment, breathing the salt air and feeling the particular quality of a man who has just done something irreversible and is registering it not with relief, but with the strange, untethered sensation of a life-changing direction while standing still. He went to his room. He took the ultrasound photograph out of his pocket and set it on the nightstand beside the lamp. He was going to tell Serena in the morning about Marcus, about Cross, about all of it. She deserved the complete picture. He had spent their entire marriage giving her partial information, filtered through his judgment about what she could handle, and he was done with that version of himself. He set his phone to charge. He lay down. At 4:47 in the morning, his phone lit up with a message from a number he didn't recognize. He was almost asleep and reached for it automatically. The message was 4 words and a photograph. Too late. Check Marcus. The photograph was a screenshot of an email chain. He sat up in the dark and held the phone close and read it twice. The email chain was between Marcus Hale and Gerald Fenn. Gerald Fenn, his attorney. Yale Law, 23 years of managing Voss family legal infrastructure. The chain started 6 weeks ago, before Lucien left New York, before Serena left, before any of this had begun. The subject line was Transition Protocol. He read it. He read it again. The emails outlined, in the careful language of men who understand how documentation works against them, a plan for the managed dissolution of the Voss Syndicate's operational infrastructure, not its dismantling, but its transfer. Assets, routes, accounts, and political relationships systematically moved under a new organizational structure that would operate under Adrian Rourke's broader network while maintaining the appearance of the Voss name for continued political leverage. Marcus had been the operational architect. Fenn had been the legal architect. And the plan had been set in motion before Lucien left New York, which meant it had been designed around the assumption that Lucien would leave, or that he could be made to leave, or that his departure could be accelerated. He thought about the Winter Sovereign Gala, about Celeste's comment about fragile wives and distractions. He thought about the way his workload had increased in the 6 months before Serena left, the calls that couldn't wait, the crises that needed immediate attention, the sense of constant pressure that had seemed like the natural metabolism of empire, but now looked, from the outside, like a schedule designed to ensure he was never fully present. He thought about who had managed that schedule. Marcus. He sat in the dark with the phone in his hand and the ocean outside and the ultrasound photograph on the nightstand, and he felt the full weight of what he was looking at. His 9-year right hand had been working for Rourke since before Lucien's father died, had managed the information flow that kept Lucien distracted, had probably, contributed to the conditions that drove Serena out of the apartment and into a bus north. And his attorney of 23 years had been drafting the legal transfer of his entire empire while pretending to negotiate his immunity deal, which meant the call logs he'd provided to Cross this afternoon, the ones that were supposed to be the preview, the opening move of his cooperation, were already compromised. Fenn had drafted the cooperation framework. Fenn knew what was in it. Fenn had had access to every call, every document, every piece of intelligence Lucien had assumed was protected by attorney-client privilege. He was sitting in a motel room at 5 in the morning in a coastal town in Rhode Island, and his empire was being stolen in real time by the 2 people he had trusted most, and the federal agent he'd just handed his leverage to had received that information through an attorney who was working against him. And 32 weeks pregnant in a rental above the diner, Serena was sleeping without knowing that the threat had been inside the walls the entire time. Not outside. Inside. He got up. He put on his shoes. He picked up his phone and the ultrasound photograph, and he walked out into the cold dark and stood on the gravel, and the ocean worked the rocks below the bluff, and the fog was thick and absolute. And he stood in it, and he understood with complete clarity that every plan he had made in the past 2 weeks was... He stood in the gravel lot for 40 seconds. That was all he allowed himself. 40 seconds of standing in the cold fog with the ocean working the rocks below, and the full catastrophic map of it spread out in his head. Fenn, Marcus, the compromise cooperation framework, The intelligence he'd handed crossed through a pipeline that ran directly back to Rourke's network. Then he started moving. First, Cross. Not through Fenn, not through any channel Marcus had touched. He pulled Cross's direct cell from memory. She had given it to him verbally during the call, and he had filed it the way he filed everything that mattered, without writing it down. He dialed. She picked up on the second ring. Federal agents running active cases did not fully sleep. Voss. It's 5 in the morning. Fenn is compromised. He kept his voice low and flat. Everything I gave you today went through Gerald Fenn. He's been coordinating with Marcus Hale on a transfer of Voss assets to Rourke's network for at least 6 weeks. The cooperation framework he helped structure. Assume Rourke has seen it. A silence. Not the silence of surprise. The silence of a professional recalibrating rapidly. How confident are you? I have an email chain. 6 weeks of it. I'll forward it directly to you from my phone in the next 5 minutes. Not through Fenn's server. Direct. Do it. He heard her stand up, heard the particular sounds of a room shifting from nighttime to operational. If this holds, Fenn's an obstruction and conspiracy at minimum. It also means your cooperation package needs to be renegotiated through independent counsel. I know, I don't have independent counsel at 5 in the morning. I'll have someone at your location by 8. A pause. Are you and the civilian secure? For now. He looked at the dark town around him. The diner was closed and dark. The clinic was dark. The sheriff's office had a light in the window that might have been automatic. Rourke knows the location. His people have been watching it. I don't know if the Marcus revelation accelerates his timeline. I can have a field team in your area in how long? Rhode Island field office, Greyhaven proximity, 3 hours minimum, 4 more likely. He looked at the fog. He thought about what 3 or 4 hours meant at 5 in the morning in a town with 1 sheriff and no backup. Move them now, he said. Don't wait for 8. Moving. He heard her on another line already. Voss, stay off Fenn's number. Don't contact Marcus. Don't make any moves that signal you know. Understood. He forwarded the email chain to Cross's direct number. He stood in the gravel and watched the send confirmation, and then he went to wake up Sheriff Reed. Reed's house was 3 blocks from the sheriff's office. He knew this because she'd mentioned it once in a way that told him she considered proximity to her work a practical necessity, not a lifestyle choice. He knocked. He heard movement almost immediately, which meant she slept the way field-adjacent people sleep, on the surface of wakefulness, never fully under. She opened the door in a jacket thrown over pajamas with a hand near her sidearm, and the expression of someone who had been expecting this kind of knock, without knowing when it would come. How bad? She said. My attorney is working for Rourke. The cooperation deal I set up yesterday is compromised. Federal backup is 3 to 4 hours out. He held her gaze. And someone sent me a message tonight that suggests Rourke's people already know the deal is blown. Reed looked at him for precisely 2 seconds. Then she stepped back from the door. Come in. Her kitchen was small and organized and had the particular quality of a room belonging to someone who lives alone but has made peace with it. She filled a coffee maker without asking him whether he wanted any because the answer was obvious. What do you need from me? She said. Serena needs to be moved. Not far. The clinic is safest. Mercer has equipment and it's a defensible building, 1 entrance. Mercer's been there 15 years and knows every room. He pulled out a chair but didn't sit. Too much current running through him. And I need your honest assessment of what 2 people with limited backup can realistically do if Rourke moves before Cross's team arrives. Reed poured 2 cups. She set one in front of him. She wrapped both hands around hers and looked at the table surface for a moment, thinking. 2 people in this town, she said carefully, on a clear night with good sight lines. Manageable. In this fog, at this hour, with a pregnant civilian who can't move fast. She looked up. We need Mercer. He knows the building. And we need Martha Quinn, because Martha keeps a shotgun under the counter and she's used it. Martha. She was a narcotics officer in Providence for 12 years before she moved here. Reed watched his expression. She doesn't advertise it. He thought about the woman with the dish towel and the no-nonsense competence and the way she had read him in approximately 4 seconds the first night he arrived. No, he said. She doesn't. Go get Serena. I'll call Mercer and Martha. Reed picked up her phone. And Voss, when we get to the clinic, you tell me everything you know about Rourke's operational style. How he moves, how many people, what his preference is for entry. She met his eyes across the kitchen. I don't care who you were. Right now I need what you know. Everything I know, he said. Go. He knocked on Serena's door at 5:40. He had spent the 3-minute walk preparing exactly what to say and in what order, prioritizing the information that required immediate action over the information that would require a longer and more painful conversation. She answered in under a minute, which told him she had been sleeping lightly. She looked at his face, and her eyes went very clear. What happened? We need to move to the clinic. I'll explain on the way. Can you walk? She was already reaching for her shoes. Yes, talk. He told her while she put on her shoes and her coat and her cardiac monitor transmitter, clipping it to her waistband with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been doing it for weeks. He told her about the email chain and about Fenn and about the message at 4:47 and about Cross and the federal team 3 hours out. He told her in the ordered, unadorned way that he told her things now. Complete information, no filtering for what he thought she could handle. She listened without interrupting. She tied her second shoe and stood up. Marcus, she said, he's the one who told Rourke where I was. Yes. She absorbed this. He watched her absorb it, not with the dramatic reaction of someone for whom betrayal was a surprise, but with the particular exhausted recognition of someone who had learned to expect the world to be more compromised than it appeared. How long has he been working for Rourke? 8 years, since before your father died, he said, and caught himself. Since before my father died. She looked at him. And Fenn? I don't know the full timeline yet. At least 6 weeks on the current operation. The men you trusted most? Yes. She picked up the small bag she kept packed by the door. She'd been keeping it packed since the rattle arrived, he noticed, and said nothing about it. And she looked at him with those steady, measuring eyes. Okay, she said. Let's go. They walked to the clinic in the fog, moving quickly, his hand at her elbow not gripping, present, available, not directing. The town was silent around them. The ocean below the bluff was audible, a constant low percussion, the waves working the rocks without urgency. He kept scanning the street. Nothing moved in the fog. Mercer was already at the clinic when they arrived, awake and competent in the particular way of someone pulled from sleep into professional mode. A slight dishevelment in his clothing, but none in his thinking. He took one look at Serena's monitor transmitter and at Lucien and said simply, Exam room 2. More internal, one small window, locks from inside. Martha arrived 4 minutes later. She was carrying a bag over one shoulder, and she looked at Lucien as she came through the door with the expression of a woman revising a significant assumption about the man she'd been making eggs for. Narcotics, Providence, Lucien said. 12 years. Somebody's been talking. She set the bag down on the reception desk and unzipped it. Inside, a short-barrel shotgun, a handgun he recognized as Sig Sauer, and a box of shells that she began loading with the efficiency of long practice. I moved here to stop doing exactly this. I'm sorry. She looked at him sideways. Buy me a new griddle after this is over and we'll call it even. She finished loading, chambered around, and set the shotgun on the desk within reach. Tell me about these people. Lucien told her. He told Reed at the same time, both of them listening in the reception area while Mercer settled Serena in exam room 2 and attached a proper cardiac monitor and checked the baby's positioning with the handheld device he kept for obstetric emergencies. He told them what he knew about Rourke's operational style. Small teams. Rourke believed in efficiency over numbers. 3 to 5 people maximum for a precision operation. He preferred to move at gray hour, the 40 minutes before full dawn when visibility was lowest and civilian activity was minimal. He preferred properties with single points of entry because it reduced variables. He was not personally brave. He directed from proximity, but never from the front. So, he's close, Reed said. If he's moving tonight, yes, within visual range. She looked at the fog pressed against the clinic windows. Visual range is 20 feet, which works both ways. Reed absorbed this with the flat practicality of someone running calculations. Martha on the front, I'll take the rear exterior. You, she looked at him. You stay with Serena. You should be with your pregnant wife who has a heart condition and is 30 weeks along and whose stress levels I am professionally invested in keeping manageable. Reed held his gaze. I need you in that room. If something happens and she needs to move, you're the one moving her. Can you accept that? He looked at the exam room door. Every instinct he owned said go outside, find the threat, remove it. 15 years of operating from the front, of being the thing other people were afraid of. Every muscle in him aimed toward the door. Yes, he said. He went into exam room 2. Serena was on the exam table with the monitor attached, and Mercer taking a baseline reading, and the room was very quiet and very small and smelled of antiseptic and the thin sweetness of the ultrasound gel Mercer was using to check the baby's position. She looked at Lucien when he came in. She read him immediately, the contained energy, the jaw, the hands. You want to be outside, she said. Reed's right. I should be here. That's not what I asked. He looked at the monitor screen showing the baby's heartbeat. Steady, rhythmic, indifferent to the situation in the way that only the very new and the very old can be indifferent to danger. Yes, I want to be outside. But you're here. Yes. She looked at him for a moment, then she reached out and took his hand. Not gently, not tentatively. She took it the way you take something you need for structural support. Both hands, fingers interlocked, with a grip that registered the full physical urgency of the situation. He held on. Mercer finished the baseline, noted the readings, set his kit within reach, and positioned himself near the door with the combination of medical availability and tactical awareness of a man who had apparently been both things at different points in his life. They waited. At 6:14, something moved outside the front window. He heard Martha's voice, low, command register. Stop there. Then the click of the shotgun action, which carried through the wall clearly. Hands where I see them, both of them. Lucien was at the exam room door before he processed the decision to move. He put his hand on the frame and looked back at Serena. Stay with Mercer. She was already sitting up straighter, both hands on her stomach, the focused stillness of someone doing the controlled breathing and meaning it. She nodded. He went to the reception area. Through the plate glass window, he could see Martha in the doorway, shotgun leveled, facing the fog. Two shapes resolved out of the gray. Men, both larger than average, both with the particular stillness of people trained to absorb a weapon pointed at them without reacting with their whole body. Professionals. One had his hands up. The other was slower. Both, Martha said. I won't say it again. The second man raised his hands. Behind Lucien, the rear door crashed open. He spun. A third man was through the door before it finished moving. Fast. Professional. The kind of entry that only worked because it was coordinated to coincide with the front distraction. He had a weapon up, and he swept the reception area in the trained way, and his eyes landed on Lucien, and he recalibrated in a fraction of a second. Voss. Not a question. An identification. Yes. Walk out the front, both of you. You and the woman. That's all this needs to be. Lucien put himself between the man and the exam room door. She's 30 weeks pregnant and she has a cardiac condition. She doesn't walk anywhere. That's not my problem. Whose problem is it? Mr. Rourke wants a conversation. You walk out, you have the conversation, the woman stays here with the doctor, and nobody... Rourke is outside, Lucien said it flatly. The man's eyes moved. A fractional shift, reflex, the involuntary tell of someone whose principle is closer than they'd intended to reveal. Lucien registered it. Rourke was within 20 feet, in the fog, within the visual perimeter of the clinic. He heard Reed's voice from outside the rear, crisp, authoritative. Greyhaven Sheriff, drop the weapon. A beat. Now. The man in the doorway didn't drop it. He was doing the calculation. 3 people outside with 2 of his own covered, 1 sheriff behind him, the man he needed in front of him, and the asset 1 door away. Lucien watched him do the calculation. He had done that calculation himself, In different rooms, different configurations, the entire working life he was in the process of dismantling. He knew exactly how it resolved when a professional decided the objective was worth the complications. "She doesn't come out of that room," Lucien said. He kept his voice very quiet. "I'll come outside. I'll talk to Rourke, but she stays here." "Lucien," Serena's voice through the exam room door, controlled. "Don't. Stay in there. Don't you dare walk out that door." The man with the gun was watching this exchange with the attention of someone recalculating the emotional variables in a situation he'd assessed as purely tactical. His weapon didn't waver, but his eyes were doing more work than they had been. "She's not part of this," Lucien said, to the man, to the room, to whatever version of the situation could still be steered. "She never was. You know that. Rourke knows that. This is between Rourke and me, and it has been for 11 years. He took one step toward the door, one step toward the man with the gun. "Let me go outside." A beat. The man stepped back to allow passage. Lucien opened the rear door and stepped into the fog. It was full gray hour now. Not dark, not light. The particular visibility of a world in transition where everything had shape but no detail. The clinic's rear lot was gravel and 2 parked cars, and the fog pressing in from the water. Reed was 15 feet to his left with her weapon on the third man, who was now prone on the gravel with his hands behind his head. Her eyes cut to Lucien in a way that communicated approximately 7 things without language, most of which were variations of "What are you doing?" He scanned the fog. There, at the edge of the lot, at the perimeter where the gravel ended and the scrub grass of the bluff started, a shape that wasn't moving because it didn't need to. A man in a coat, watching. Not holding a weapon because men like Rourke didn't hold weapons. They watched. They directed. They stood at the edge of things and let other people absorb the consequences. Lucien walked toward him. He heard Reed behind him. A controlled breath, the sound of someone deciding whether to intervene and concluding that the geometry of the situation didn't permit it without compromising her position on the man on the ground. He walked across the gravel and onto the grass and stopped 6 feet from Adrian Rourke. He had seen photographs. The reality was slightly less impressive than the legend. A man in his early 60s, medium build, the kind of face that registered as ordinary until you looked at the eyes, which were the pale, washed-out gray of something that had been cold for a very long time. He was wearing a coat that cost money and standing in fog at 6 in the morning as though this was simply where his schedule had taken him. "Lucien," he said. He used the first name with a familiarity that acknowledged they had been in opposition long enough to earn a kind of grim intimacy. "You look terrible. You sent a rattle to my daughter. I sent a message." He shrugged, and the shrug was the most offensive thing about him, the complete comfort of a man who had never personally absorbed the consequences of his decisions. The phrasing was perhaps heavy-handed. "I wanted your attention." "You have it." "Yes." Rourke looked at him steadily. "You spoke to Cross yesterday, through Fenn, which you now know was a problem. Whatever you gave her is currently of limited use, and whatever you were planning to provide—" He tilted his head slightly. "It changes the calculation. You think I won't rebuild the approach. I think you're standing in a field in Rhode Island at 6 in the morning in jeans from a gas station, and your cooperation window closes the moment Cross confirms Fenn's breach, and the leverage you thought you had is considerably thinner than it was 24 hours ago." He paused. "I'm not here to threaten you. I'm here to offer you an alternative." "Which is?" "Walk away." Rourke said it simply. "Take the woman and the child and whatever version of yourself you're constructing in this town and walk away from all of it. The network, the family name, the cooperation agreement, all of it. Disappear quietly. You've been trying to disappear anyway." A pause. "I take the structure, which is already half mine, and nobody, including the woman and the child, gets pointed at again." The fog moved between them. The ocean worked the rocks below the bluff. The gravel lot behind him was very quiet in the way that meant multiple people were listening without moving. Lucien looked at Adrian Rourke. He thought about what it would mean. The disappearance. A life in a small town or a smaller town or somewhere entirely off the map. Serena and Bean, and the chance to be something he had never been in the world that was currently being offered the exit from. He thought about it with complete honesty. which was something he had not often permitted himself. He thought about the trafficking routes he knew ran through the Voss network, about the people on those routes who were not making choices about being there, about the political architecture that kept investigators looking the other direction, about the specific structure that Rourke intended to absorb and continue and expand. He thought about Serena saying their daughter would never inherit this world. "No," he said. Rourke's expression didn't change. "That's a significant decision." "I know what it is." The cooperation agreement is being rebuilt through independent counsel as of 2 hours ago. He watched Rourke's eyes for the tell and found it a very small, very fast reassessment. Cross has the email chain between Fenn and Marcus. She has it directly from my phone, not through Fenn's server. She's been awake since before I called you a problem. He held Rourke's gaze. "You have lawyers who are already making calls. I know that. The window to contain this is closing from your side, not mine." Rourke was very still. "The trafficking routes," Lucien said. "That's what Cross has been trying to build for 4 years. Not the financial structure, not the political network. The routes. Because the routes are federal jurisdiction in 12 states and 3 international agreements, and they are the thing that puts the people who run them away for decades rather than years." He paused. "I have the routes. Not the ones you've moved since my father died. The original infrastructure. The one my grandfather built and my father maintained, and I have been running by default because I never looked at it hard enough to understand what I was actually moving." He let that land. "I have it in a form that is documented and cross-referenced, and is currently with an attorney who has no relationship to either of us, in a sealed package that was sent before I walked out this door." The last part was not entirely true. The package did not yet exist, but the information existed, in his memory and in records he could reconstruct, and Rourke didn't know the difference, and the calculation he was running right now in those pale, cold eyes was whether to believe it. Rourke looked at him for a long moment. The fog thickened. Somewhere behind them, gravel shifted. One of the men from the front, repositioning. Lucien didn't look. He kept his eyes on Rourke. "You understand what happens to you," Rourke said, quietly. "If you give them the routes, your family built that infrastructure. Your name is on all of it. The immunity deal doesn't cover what's underneath those routes. I know. You could lose everything. I've already lost everything." He heard himself say it and understood it was true in a way that had nothing to do with defeat. "The empire is gone. The structure is gone. The name is useful to you, but it means nothing to me anymore." He looked at Rourke across 6 feet of bluff grass in Rhode Island fog at gray hour. "What I have is a daughter I haven't met yet, and a wife who left me because loving me was killing her and the specific chance to be something different than what I was raised to be. That's what I have, and I will burn every piece of the structure to the ground to protect it." Something moved in Rourke's face. Something that in another man might have been called reluctant recognition. "The federal team is 20 minutes out," Lucien said. He didn't know if this was true. He hoped it was true. He said it the way he had learned to say things in rooms where the fact of saying them with certainty was itself a form of action. Rourke looked at him. Then Rourke looked past him at the clinic building. At the light in the window of exam room 2, visible even in the fog, a warm yellow rectangle in the gray. Something crossed his face that was almost human and then disappeared. He turned and walked into the fog. Lucien stood on the bluff grass and watched him go, and did not move until the shape dissolved completely into the gray. Then he turned and walked back across the gravel, and Reed was there, watching him, with the expression of a woman filing several assessments simultaneously. "He's moving," Lucien said. "Get your people on the road north. He'll try to reach his car before—" "Already called it." She had her radio in hand. "State police intercepted the coast road 3 minutes ago. He's walking into it." She looked at him. "The federal team is 11 minutes out, not 20. He exhaled. "Good. That was either very brave or very stupid. Probably both." She almost smiled. It lasted less than a second. "Go check on your wife." He went inside. The reception area was clear. Martha was already lowering the shotgun, watching through the front window as the 2 men outside were walked toward Reed's cruiser, with their hands visible. Her expression was the resigned professionalism of someone who'd been pulled back into the life they left. He went to the exam room door. He knocked. "It's me." A pause. Then Serena's voice. "Come in." She was still on the exam table. The cardiac monitor was running steady lines across the screen. Mercer was noting readings with his back to the door, giving them the privacy of not watching. Serena was sitting very straight with both hands flat on her stomach, and her face had the quality of someone who has been doing controlled breathing for a sustained period and is deciding whether to stop. He came to the side of the exam table. He looked at the monitor and then at her. "It's over," he said. "Or the beginning of over." She looked at him. She looked at his hands. No blood this time, which was a different kind of thing than the last time she'd checked. She looked at his face with those measuring eyes, and whatever she found there made her exhale with the full weight of everything she'd been holding since 5:40 in the morning. "You went outside," she said. "Yes." "I told you not to." "I know." "Did it work?" "Yes." She pressed her lips together and looked at the ceiling for a moment, and he could see her deciding something. Could see the precise internal moment of it, the thing tipping. She looked back at him. "Sit down," she said, "before you fall down." He pulled the stool from the corner and sat. His legs had been running on adrenaline for 3 hours, and now that the adrenaline was clearing, he could feel the shakiness underneath it, the body's honest accounting of what the mind had been ignoring. He sat. On the monitor, the baby's heartbeat ran its steady line. 62 beats per minute for Serena. Lucien counted them without meaning to. The federal team arrived at 6:41. He heard the vehicles in the lot, 2 of them, the particular sound of government-issue doors, and then Cross's voice in the reception area, efficient and controlled, running through the scene assessment with Reed. He stayed where he was. Serena had closed her eyes. Not asleep. Her breathing was too deliberate for sleep. Just resting. Just being still for a moment inside a morning that had asked too much of both of them. He looked at her face, the cardiac monitor, the steady lines. Outside, the fog was beginning to thin. The first real light of morning was working at the edges of it. He could see the color changing in the small window above the exam table. The particular pale gold of early sun on coastal fog. Nothing dramatic, just the patient geometry of a day. He stayed on that stool for 6 minutes. He knew because Mercer's wall clock was directly in his line of sight, and he watched it without meaning to. The second hand making its patient rounds, indifferent to everything that had happened in this room and in this town over the past 3 weeks. 6 minutes. Then Cross knocked on the exam room door, and he stood up and went to deal with what came next. It took 4 days to deal with what came next. Cross ran her scene assessment and filed her reports and coordinated with the Rhode Island State Police who had pulled Rourke's vehicle over on the coast road at 6:23 in the morning, 1 mile north of Greyhaven, with Rourke himself in the back seat, and a driver who turned out to be a federal warrant from a 2019 case that had gone cold. Rourke was processed and transferred to federal custody before 8 o'clock. His attorney was on a plane from New York within 2 hours. The attorney was not Gerald Fenn, who by that time was the subject of his own federal inquiry. Marcus Hale turned himself in through a public defender in Manhattan on the second day. He had apparently spent the intervening 36 hours making a calculation about cooperation versus prosecution and arrived at the obvious answer. Cross told Lucien this with the neutral efficiency of someone reporting a weather update. He listened and said nothing. There was nothing useful to say about Marcus that he hadn't already said in a hardware store rental at 3 in the morning. Fenn took longer. Fenn had 23 years of experience with exactly the kind of legal machinery that was now pointed at him, and he deployed that experience with the particular cold fluency of a man who understood every gear of the system he was caught in. The obstruction charges held. The conspiracy exposure held. The cooperation deal he eventually negotiated was significantly less comfortable than anything he had structured for other people. Lucien provided the roots. He sat across from Cross and an FBI documentation specialist in a conference room at the Rhode Island field office, and he talked for 11 hours across 2 days. He talked about infrastructure that went back to his grandfather, that had been running through multiple generations of Voss family management, that had moved things he should have looked at harder much sooner. He talked about the political architecture, names, accounts, relationships, the specific mechanisms by which federal investigations had been redirected over the course of decades. He talked about the financial instruments through which the network had laundered money through legitimate foundations and real estate structures, and charitable organizations that bore his family's name and his mother's careful curation. Cross listened with the focused attention of someone who was finally hearing the shape of a thing they had been circling for years. She asked precise questions. She didn't express satisfaction because professionals don't, but he could see it in the quality of her attention. The way people look when the thing they've been assembling suddenly shows them its complete form. On the third day, the immunity structure was confirmed through independent counsel, a criminal defense attorney out of Boston, whom Cross recommended and whom Lucien had vetted through channels that had nothing to do with the Voss family network. The financial charges were reduced to civil penalties. The racketeering and conspiracy exposure was covered. The roots were the key, as he'd told Rourke on the bluff. They were federal jurisdiction in dimensions that made everything else secondary. Celeste's name appeared in the documentation on the second day. It appeared in connection with 3 specific foundation accounts that had been used to redirect investigative attention on 2 separate occasions. Cross noted it without editorializing. Lucien noted it without surprise and with a kind of grief that was different from anger, older than anger, the specific exhaustion of understanding something completely that you had spent years allowing yourself to understand only partially. He called Celeste on the evening of the second day. She answered on the first ring. "I assume this is about the federal activity," she said. "Yes." "Gerald has told me Ben is cooperating with investigators, Celeste. Whatever he's told you in the last 48 hours was told to you by a man under federal pressure." He paused. "Your foundation accounts are frozen. There will be a formal proceeding. You should get an attorney who doesn't know our family." A silence. The kind of silence that in another person would be the space before they cried or apologized or collapsed into something human. In Celeste, it was simply the sound of a woman calculating. "You did this," she said. "I ended it. There's a difference." "You think there is." "I know there is." He looked at the conference room wall. Plain, institutional, nothing on it. The most honest room he'd been in for years. "I'm not calling to argue. I'm calling to tell you directly before you hear it from someone else, because whatever else is true about us, you're my mother." Another silence. Longer. "The girl," Celeste said finally. "Not the baby, not your daughter. The girl." The distance of the word was either deliberate or so habitual it had become unconscious. He suspected both. "She's well?" "She's well. Serena's well." "Good." 2 syllables. Utterly controlled. The sound of a woman who had decided decades ago that vulnerability was a form of damage and had never reconsidered the decision. Good. He ended the call. He sat in the rented car outside the field office, and the Rhode Island night was cold and clear, the fog gone finally, and he could see actual stars for the first time since he'd arrived in the Northeast. And he thought about his mother at 25, a photograph he'd seen once. Her in a garden somewhere, laughing at something, unguarded in the way that photographs of people before they become fully themselves sometimes catch them. He thought about the specific path from that woman to the one on the phone. He thought about his father and the dynasty and the weight of all of it. He felt sorry for her. He hadn't expected to feel sorry for her. It didn't change anything that had happened. It didn't make the recordings or the screened calls or the 23 years of Fen any smaller. But it was there anyway. The sorrow of understanding how someone becomes what they become, which was its own kind of knowledge, uncomfortable and necessary. He drove back to Greyhaven. The federal proceedings moved through the system over the following months with the deliberate machinery of institutional justice. Slow, grinding, occasionally maddening in their procedural precision, but moving. Rourke was held without bail pending trial on trafficking and conspiracy charges that Cross described in a brief call to Lucien as the most complete federal case her division had constructed in 11 years. She said it without self-congratulation. He appreciated that. Marcus pled to reduce charges and cooperated fully, which meant he would serve time, but not the maximum. Lucien had no feeling about this that he could cleanly articulate. He found that the betrayal, viewed from enough distance and through enough of his own self-knowledge, had the particular quality of something he had partly constructed himself, a 9-year architecture of loyalty as transaction, where the terms were never honestly spoken and the foundation was never honestly examined. He had built a system in which loyalty was purchased and maintained by proximity to power. He should not have been surprised that it had a price. He said this once to a therapist, a woman in Providence he began seeing in the 4th week after the federal proceedings began. He said it the way he said most things in those sessions, carefully, with the particular precision of someone who has learned to be accurate because inaccuracy has costs. The therapist listened and asked him to say more about that, and he said more about it, and then more after that. And the sessions became one of the stranger disciplines of his life. The discipline of sitting in a room and talking honestly without managing the outcome. He had never done that before. It was harder than most things he'd done that were considered difficult. The hurricane arrived on a Tuesday in late October. Greyhaven had been watching it for 4 days, the Weather Service tracking a system that had organized off the Virginia coast and moved northeast with the particular unhurried destructiveness of large Atlantic storms. Reed had issued advisories. Mercer had stocked the clinic. Martha had taped the diner windows and moved the grill to the back wall and left the coffee running because people came to the diner in emergencies, and she had been making coffee in emergencies for 30 years. Serena was 34 weeks by then, 4 weeks from the original due date, though Mercer had told her from the beginning that the cardiac situation made the standard timeline a suggestion rather than a plan. She had been having contractions since Monday. She told Lucien on Monday evening, sitting at the kitchen table in the rental that had become, in the strange organic way of temporary things that stay longer than intended, something that felt like home. She told him the way she told him things now, directly, with the expectation that he would receive it rather than filter it. "They're irregular," she said. "Mercer knows, he said to track them." "How far apart?" 12 to 15 minutes, sometimes 20. She looked at him. "He said at 7 minutes I call him." "Okay." He sat down across from her. "How do you feel?" "Like someone is occasionally trying to remove my internal organs." She said it with the specific dry pragmatism she used for physical discomforts, which he had come to understand was not stoicism exactly, but a chosen relationship with discomfort. She acknowledged it fully and then decided how much to let it direct her. "And nervous." "I'm nervous." "Me too." She looked at him with a slight surprise, not that he'd said it, but the completeness with which he'd said it. No qualifier, no management of the admission. "Good," she said. "That's honest." The storm made landfall at 2 in the morning. It hit Greyhaven with the full organized violence of a system that had been building momentum over 400 miles of open Atlantic, wind that peaked at 83 miles per hour, rain that fell horizontally and with the density of something solid, and a surge that took the coast road by 3:30 and left it under 18 inches of water by 4. Serena's contractions went to 8 minutes at 2:45, 7 minutes at 3:09. He called Mercer. By 3:30 they were at the clinic in the storm, which was an experience that Lucien would retain in complete sensory detail for the rest of his life. The wind trying to take the door, Serena gripping his arm with a strength that surprised him, rain hitting with the specific percussion of something that meant business, and the two of them moving across the parking lot bent against it while the world made sounds like structures failing. Mercer was already running the room. He was the kind of doctor who in ordinary circumstances appeared slightly rumpled and unhurried, and who in emergency circumstances became a completely different instrument, precise, fast, economical, the unnecessary things stripped away. He assessed Serena, noted the contractions, attached the cardiac monitor, checked the baby's position, and said to Lucien, "She's early, but she's moving. Get Reed on the phone and tell her we need the emergency helicopter from Providence." Lucien got Reed on the phone. Reed told him the coast road was underwater and that the bridge north was closed, and that she had already called state emergency services, and the helicopter was grounded at Providence because of wind speeds. "When does the wind drop?" Lucien said. Meteorology is saying the eye wall passes between 4 and 5. Wind drops fast after that. She paused. Mercer knows what he's doing. I know he does. Lucien. Her voice shifted. Not softer, more direct. She needs calm right now. You understand what I'm saying. He understood what she was saying. He ended the call. He went back into the room. Serena was on the exam table in the full mechanical reality of early labor, which was nothing like the management of it. It was physical and immediate and demanded everything and had no interest in the emotional geometry of the people around it. She had sweat on her forehead and her jaw was set, and she was breathing with the controlled intention of someone who had been practicing this specific breathing for weeks and was now discovering the difference between practice and the actual thing. He went to the side of the table. She grabbed his hand before he offered it. Talk to me, she said between breaths. Not about this. About something else. Just talk. He thought about what to say. He thought about the archive of things they had never talked about. 3 years of dinners where the phone rang, 3 years of mornings where he'd left before she woke, 3 years of a marriage lived in parallel lines that touched at formal occasions and otherwise ran separate courses. He thought about the kitchen, the first kitchen, the small apartment with the cracked linoleum and the bad radio. There was a restaurant, he said, in the building on Chambers Street when I first had the office there. In the basement. You probably never knew it. It wasn't the kind of place people like me ate at. He kept his voice even and unhurried, calibrated to something steady. The owner was a man named... I don't remember his name. He made one thing, soup. The same soup every day for 11 years. I went in there once because Marcus sent the wrong car, and I had 40 minutes to kill, and I ate the soup, and it was the best thing I'd eaten in probably 5 years because it was just soup. Nothing complicated about it. Just the thing it was. Serena breathed through a contraction. Her grip on his hand tightened and then loosened. I went back every week for 2 years, he said. I never told anyone. It would have seemed... He searched for the word. Ordinary, and I had spent so long performing the opposite of ordinary that I'd lost track of what I actually... He stopped. I lost track of what I actually liked. She looked at him sideways. Her eyes were very clear despite everything else that was happening in her body. Did you ever take me there? No. Why? He thought about it honestly, because it was the one place that was only mine, and I didn't know how to share things that mattered. He paused. I know that now. I know how that reads. It reads honestly, she said. That's something. The wind hit the building with a sound like a freight train for 30 seconds and then moved on. The lights flickered. Mercer had a generator that took over in under 4 seconds. He'd tested it that afternoon in preparation, which was the kind of thing Mercer did. The labor moved with the storm, intensifying, receding slightly, intensifying again, always trending toward one direction. Mercer worked with the quiet competence of a man who had delivered babies in worse conditions and was not going to announce this fact because it served no purpose. Lucien held Serena's hand and talked when she asked him to talk, and was silent when she needed silence, and did not look at the cardiac monitor with the frequency he wanted to look at it because she could read his face, and she didn't need that information in real time. At 4:17, the wind began to drop. At 4:40, Mercer called for the helicopter again, and this time Providence confirmed a departure window of 20 minutes. Serena was 7 centimeters. The baby was moving the right direction. The cardiac readings were elevated, but within the range Mercer had established as his intervention threshold, and he was watching them with the full attention of someone standing at a line he hoped not to cross. At 4:58, Serena looked at Lucien during a contraction and said through her teeth, I need you to not be afraid right now. I'm not afraid. Yes, you are. I can feel it in your hand. She breathed. The contraction passed. I need you to be steady. Can you be steady? He looked at her. Her face was exhausted and entirely present in the way that physical extremity makes people present. No past, no future, just the body and the moment and what the body needed right now. Yes, he said. He meant it. She nodded. She turned back to the work. The helicopter set down on the flooded football field at the edge of town at 5:23. Lucien heard the rotors through the clinic walls, a sound like something being reclaimed from the storm. Mercer was already coordinating with the flight medics on his radio, relaying Serena's vitals, the gestational age, the cardiac specifics, the current labor status. The gurney came through the clinic door with two medics who moved with the choreography of people who had done this in moving vehicles and difficult weather and treated the clinic floor as simply another surface to navigate. They transferred Serena with the efficient care of professionals, and she went from Mercer's hands to their hands with the particular trust of someone who has surrendered control to competence and found it acceptable. At the door of the clinic, she looked back at Lucien. He was 3 steps behind the gurney. He had been 3 steps behind the entire way because that was where he was supposed to be. Present, not directing, not taking over the geometry of the thing. She looked at him, and her face had everything in it. The exhaustion, the fear, the pain, and underneath all of it something that was neither gratitude nor love exactly, but was the specific look of a person acknowledging another person's presence in a moment where presence is not guaranteed. "Come to the hospital," she said. "I will." "Not in charge, just there." "Just there," he agreed. Outside, one of the flight medics informed him there was only room for medical personnel and the patient. Lucien looked at Serena on the gurney in the early morning air, the storm having retreated into low gray cloud and the specific, exhausted quiet that follows violent weather. He looked at her, and she looked at him, and the rotor wash was pulling at everything, and the world was very loud and very clear. "Please," she said. One word. He stepped back. He watched the medics load her. He watched the helicopter door close. He watched it lift. That particular moment when a helicopter transitions from earthbound machine to something else, when the ground relationship breaks and it becomes briefly neither here nor there before it finds its altitude and angles away. He watched until he couldn't see it anymore. Then he went to find a car that could reach Providence. St. Vincent Medical Center was 40 minutes north on roads that were still partly flooded and entirely dark. He drove with the focused attention of someone who has decided that concentration is the only permitted emotional state, and arrived at the hospital at 6:51 in the morning with his jeans still damp from the parking lot puddles, and 2 days of stubble and the specific exhausted clarity of a man who has been running on urgency for hours and is now required to stop. The waiting area was institutional and bright, and smelled of the particular neutrality that hospitals achieve through sustained effort, nothing that smells too much like anything, because the smells underneath are too much like themselves. He sat in a chair near the window. He looked at his hands. He thought about the soup restaurant on Chambers Street. He thought about being at 12 weeks. He thought about a letter on a pillow and a ring. He sat. At 8:44, a neonatal specialist named Dr. Corinna Webb came to the waiting area and found him. She was a small woman with silver-streaked hair and the manner of someone who has delivered difficult information enough times to do it with care but without delay. "Mr. Voss." "Yes." "Your daughter was delivered at 7:58. She's in the NICU. She's early, and her lungs needed assistance, but she's stable. She's fighting." Dr. Webb looked at him steadily. "She's 3 pounds, 11 ounces. That's on the better side of the range for 34 weeks. He heard everything she said. He filed it. He waited because he could see there was more, and the more was what his entire nervous system had been bracing for since the helicopter disappeared into the cloud. "Your wife is in surgery," Dr. Webb said. "Her heart went into an arrhythmia during delivery. The surgical team is working. I'll come back the moment there's an update." She left. He sat. The window showed a gray morning, the post-storm sky with its particular washed quality, everything clarified by the violence that preceded it, the trees wet and still, the parking lot holding water in its depressions. An ordinary morning, a Tuesday morning in Rhode Island. He sat in the chair for 2 hours. He did not call anyone. He did not contact Marcus or Reed or Cross or any of the various people who existed in his life in different capacities. He sat with his hands in his lap and the empty waiting room around him, and he stayed completely, unperformatively present in the fact of not knowing, which was perhaps the hardest thing he had ever done. He thought about the difference between enduring something and trying to escape it. He had spent his entire life in the second category. When something was intolerable, he moved, he acted, he transformed the situation through force of will or money or violence. Sitting in a hospital chair having no available action was the distillation of everything he could not fix. He could not fix Serena's heart. He could not fix what the roots had carried. He could not fix 23 years of Fen, or 9 years of Marcus, or 30 years of Celeste's architecture, or his own 3 years of willful inattention. He could sit in the chair and let the weight of all of it be exactly what it was. He sat. At 11:07, a surgeon appeared in the waiting area doorway. Older, the kind of tired that meant he'd been running since before the helicopter landed, a surgical cap still in his hand. "Mr. Voss, I'm Dr. Anand Patel. Your wife is out of surgery." He stood. She flatlined twice on the table. "We have her stabilized. She's in the ICU and she's going to need careful monitoring for the next 72 hours, but she is stable." Patel looked at him with the steady directness of a man who delivered these sentences regularly and had never found a way to make them easier. "She came through it. She's strong." He stood in the waiting room doorway and held what Dr. Patel had said and breathed. "Can I see my daughter?" he said. The NICU was a world of its own. Controlled temperature, controlled light, the soft, persistent sound of monitoring equipment, and the specific hush of a room where everyone understood that the normal volume of the world was too much for the people in it. He gowned and washed, and a nurse named Tanya, efficient, warm, the kind of warmth that was structural rather than performed, led him to an incubator near the center window. He looked at his daughter. She was the size of something he could hold in one hand. That was the first overwhelming fact. The scale of her, which was not the scale of anything he'd been prepared for despite knowing the numbers. 3 pounds, 11 ounces, 34 weeks, NICU, all of it had been language. This was not language. She had dark hair, which surprised him. She had the slightly translucent quality of premature skin and the various attachments of machines monitoring things he was grateful to have monitored. And she was in the incubator with her knees pulled toward her chest, in the position she had apparently occupied for 8 months, and had not seen any particular reason to change. She was alive. He stood at the incubator for a long time without speaking because there was nothing to say that the situation required. He looked at her the way you look at things that reorganize your understanding of what matters, slowly, completely, committing it. He thought about being at 12 weeks on a photograph in a stack of papers. He pressed one finger gently against the incubator wall. "Hi," he said, very quietly. "I'm your father. I'm aware of the irony of introducing myself." He paused. "I have a lot to make up for. I know that. I'm going to start now." Tanya nearby pretended not to hear this. He stood there for 40 minutes. "That's finished it." Serena opened her eyes on the morning of the second day. He was in the chair beside her ICU bed. He had been there since visiting hours opened and had argued, without heat, with the duty nurse about the policy on continuous presence. And the duty nurse had eventually determined that he was less disruptive present than absent and had made an undocumented exception. He had slept 3 hours in the chair the previous night and eaten a vending machine sandwich and had not gone back to the motel. He was reading a week-old newspaper, or holding one, when she opened her eyes. He set it down. She looked at the ceiling first. Then she turned her head and found him. He looked the way she had described him once, in the letter, as what she feared he would never be. Present. Actually present, without the half-attention, without the pulled focus of a man managing multiple things. Just there. In a hospital chair, unshaven, in yesterday's clothing, entirely there. "Bean," she said. Her voice was rough from the intubation. "She's good. She's in the NICU. She's breathing with some help, but she's strong." He leaned forward. "She has your hair." Serena made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh and wasn't quite a sob, but had elements of both. She closed her eyes for a moment and then opened them again. "What did you name her?" he said. She had told him she was deciding. She'd refused his suggestions, some of which were terrible, and held the decision herself with the absolute ownership of someone who had carried the weight of the choice for 8 months. "Hope," she said. "Hope Elise." He sat with that. He understood, without her explaining, where it came from. Not sentiment, not wishful thinking, but the specific earned quality of a word that had been tested and had held. Hope as a thing that survives. Hope Elise Voss, he said. She looked at him. Voss? If that's... Yes. She said it clearly, and the word had the weight of something considered and chosen. Yes, that's right. They were quiet for a while. The ICU had its own sound, the measured beeping, the ventilation, the distant professional activity of the nursing station. Outside the window, Providence was running its ordinary Tuesday. Tell me what happened, she said. All of it. He told her. He told her about Rourke and Cross, and the cooperation agreement, and Fenn and Marcus, and the email chain, and the conversation on the bluff in the fog. He told her about his mother's foundation accounts and the formal proceedings. He told her about the roots, what they had carried, what his family name had been attached to for 3 generations, the full accounting of it that he had given Cross across 11 hours in a field office conference room. She listened without interrupting. She had always been a good listener. He had known this about her from the beginning and had spent 3 years not fully using it. The immunity deal, she said. You're clear. On the criminal exposure, yes. There will be civil proceedings on the financial side. I'll lose most of what's liquid. The real estate holdings, the foundation assets, most of it will go into the recovery fund as part of the settlement. He paused. We'll have enough. It won't be Blackwell Tower. Good, she said, simply. I never liked Blackwell Tower. He looked at her. The ceilings were too high, she said. It felt like living inside a statement. He almost smiled. It was a statement. I know. She shifted carefully against the pillow, wincing. What about Celeste? He told her about the phone call. He told it plainly, without editorializing, the way he had told everything in the past hour, as fact, as record, leaving the interpretation to her rather than delivering it pre-processed. She was quiet for a moment after. Is she going to be all right? He looked at her, surprised. She's a person who made choices, Serena said. Terrible choices. But she's a person, and she's your mother, and I'm asking if she's going to be all right. He thought about it honestly. I don't know. Her attorney is competent. The exposure is serious, but not catastrophic, probably. She'll lose the foundation. He paused. She'll survive it. She's built for surviving. So are you, Serena said quietly. He didn't say anything to that. She looked at him with the evaluating attention, the calibration, and then she looked at the window, and when she turned back, something had shifted in her face. Not resolved, not finished, but differently weighted than before. I'm not going to tell you we're fixed, she said. I know. I'm not going to tell you that everything that happened between us is... She stopped. She chose her next words carefully. I left because the life we were living was killing me. That's still true. The version of that life is gone, but the patterns... She stopped again. We have to build something that isn't that. I don't know if we can. I don't know if I trust my own judgment about it yet. That's fair. I'm not asking for reassurance. I'm telling you where I actually am. I know. He held her gaze. I'm not going to tell you we're fixed either. I'm going to tell you I'm in therapy every week, and I understand things about myself now that I should have understood 10 years ago, and I have a daughter in the NICU who deserves a father who is honest about what he's capable of and what he isn't. He paused. And I would like to try. Not perform trying. Actually try. With you knowing exactly what that means and what it doesn't guarantee. She looked at him for a long time. Okay, she said finally. It wasn't absolution. It wasn't promise. It was a door left open, which was the most honest version of yes. They stayed in Greyhaven. This wasn't a dramatic decision. It was more like the recognition of a fact that had already established itself. The rental above the hardware store became a proper lease. Mercer continued as Serena's cardiologist and Hope's pediatric provider, supplemented by specialists from Providence who made the drive once a month and who Mercer coordinated with the meticulous care of a country doctor who has learned that city expertise and local knowledge are most useful in combination. Hope came home from the NICU 5 weeks after she was born, which was 2 weeks earlier than the initial estimate. Because she turned out to have views about being in the incubator that she expressed with a specificity and volume that impressed the nursing staff and delighted Lucien. In a way, he had not anticipated being delighted by anything. He brought her home on a Thursday afternoon in early December, driving at approximately 30 miles per hour on a road with no other traffic, which Serena observed from the passenger seat with an expression that was 3 parts amusement and 1 part genuine appreciation. "She's not made of glass," Serena said. "I know that. You're doing 28 miles per hour. The roads are wet. They're damp. It drizzled 2 hours ago." She looked at him. "Lucien." 32, he said, and accelerated to 32. Hope, in her car seat, was asleep and entirely untroubled by the speed of her transit. The civil proceedings ran through the spring and into summer. Lucien spent 3 days a month in Boston with his independent counsel, reviewing settlement terms and asset transfers and the administrative mechanics of dismantling a structure that had taken 3 generations to build. He approached it with the same focused attention he had once applied to building it, which his attorney found either admirable or unsettling depending on the day. The Voss name disappeared from most of the foundations it had previously anchored. The money went where it was required to go by settlement, into recovery funds, into the institutions that prosecuted the network, into the people's hands. What remained was modest by any previous standard, sufficient by any honest one. Celeste was assessed civil penalties and removed from the remaining foundation boards. She moved to her house in the Hamptons and, as far as Lucien could determine, resumed the particular performance of a Voss woman that she had been giving since before he was born. She called once, in March, on Hope's 3-month birthday. The call lasted 4 minutes. She asked about Hope's weight and development. She said nothing about anything else. He told her Hope was 21 inches and growing, and she said good in the 2-syllable way she said it. And then there was a silence that neither of them filled. "She can know her grandmother," Serena said when he told her. "When Hope is old enough to understand what that means and choose it for herself. That's not your decision, and it's not mine." He thought about that for a while. "You're more generous than I'd expected." "I'm not generous," Serena said. "I'm practical. Cutting people off completely is its own kind of control." She was nursing Hope, sitting in the good chair by the window that looked at the harbor, the late afternoon light coming in at the angle that made the room look better than it was. "I don't want to teach her that the answer to difficult people is to make them not exist." He sat with that. "No," he said finally, "neither do I." Martha Quinn came to the house on the day they closed the Blackwell Tower sale. Not because she knew, but because she seemed to operate on some frequency that picked up the significant days and moved her toward them. She brought food, which was her primary form of communication, and she sat at the kitchen table and held Hope for 45 minutes and said almost nothing, and the almost nothing was the fullest possible version of what she wanted to say. Reed came by on a Sunday, off-duty, which she announced by wearing jeans instead of her uniform. She held Hope with the practiced ease of someone who had been an aunt longer than a sheriff, and she told Serena about a development in Providence that she thought Serena might find interesting, related to a policy initiative involving domestic abuse prevention that needed someone with medical background and a specific kind of credibility. Serena said she'd think about it. She thought about it for 3 days and then called Reed and said yes. Mercer taught Lucien over the course of several Sunday mornings that became a standing informal arrangement how to fix things, not in the theoretical way, in the actual way, with actual tools, on the actual appliances and fixtures and structures of the town that needed attention. He had steady hands, which Mercer noted without elaboration. He had the patience for detail work that came from 15 years of financial architecture. He used it now on door hinges and leaking pipes, and the porch railing on Martha's diner that had been soft for 2 winters. He was not good at it at first. He was adequate at it by spring. Mercer said nothing about the improvement either, which was its own kind of acknowledgement. A year passed. More than a year. The specific texture of a life assembled itself out of the ordinary materials available. The weekly therapy sessions that he continued attending without announcement or credit seeking, the twice-weekly cardiac checks for Serena that had revealed by month 8 a stabilization that Dr. Aldridge, consulted remotely, called cautiously encouraging, the daily factual reality of Hope Elise Voss, who at 13 months was committed to the project of upright locomotion, with a determination that Lucien recognized and Serena found familiar for different reasons. He made mistakes. He reached for control when he should have waited. He made decisions unilaterally when he should have asked. He was better than he'd been and worse than he intended to be, which was apparently the condition of actual improvement, as distinct from performed improvement. His therapist described it once as the difference between a scar healing and a scar disappearing. The first was possible, the second was not. He sat with that. On a Thursday evening in late summer, with the harbor doing its slow gold thing at sunset, and the town running its ordinary machinery of closing shops and walking dogs, and the specific low-key Tuesday of a place that had never been about anything except being itself, Serena stood on the back step of the rental. Their rental, theirs by lease and by accumulated ordinary time, and watched Hope investigate the backyard with the focus of a scientist conducting a meaningful study. She had the cardiac monitor off for the first time in months. Mercer had cleared her for low-activity periods without it. The weight of its absence from her waistband was something she was still adjusting to. Lucien came out with 2 mugs, and she took one without looking up from Hope. They stood for a while watching their daughter navigate the grass. "She's going to fall," Serena said, as Hope reached a slightly uneven patch near the fence. "Yes," he agreed. Hope fell. She sat down hard on her padded rear end, regarded the ground with what appeared to be personal affront, and then stood back up and continued. "There," Serena said. "There," he agreed. The harbor caught the last of the light. The town below them settled into evening sounds. Eat, a screen door, a dog, someone's radio through a window, the specific music of an ordinary place doing what ordinary places do when they don't know they're being observed. Serena reached up and touched the ring on the chain around her neck. Not the hand she wore jewelry on, the other one. The absent gesture of someone touching something that has become part of the physical vocabulary of their body. He saw her do it. He said nothing. After a while she said, "Tell me something I don't know about you." He thought about it. He thought about the soup restaurant on Chambers Street and about other things, smaller things, stranger things, the assorted private inventory of a person that gets buried under the life they perform. "I'm afraid of birds," he said. She turned and looked at him. "Not all birds, large birds, if they're close." He looked at the harbor. "There was a Canada goose at the park near the Westchester house when I was 6. My father told me not to back away from it, and I didn't, and it bit me on the hand, and my father laughed." He paused. "I've been afraid of large birds since then, and I have never told anyone because the optics were—" Serena laughed. It was the real kind, the unguarded kind. The kind he had heard through the plate glass window of the diner on the first night. The kind he had sat in a rental car too afraid to earn. She laughed, and it lasted a real amount of time, and when it faded she was looking at him with the expression that had replaced the calibration over time. Not trust exactly, not yet the full unguarded thing, but its immediate predecessor, the look of someone deciding they are safe enough to lower one more layer. "A goose," she said. It was aggressive. "You negotiated with Adrian Rourke in zero-visibility fog on a cliff." "Rourke didn't have a beak." She laughed again, shorter. She turned back to Hope, who had located a stick and was conducting additional research. He stood beside her. Their shoulders were almost touching. Not touching, almost. The distance of 2 people who had learned that almost was sometimes more honest than contact. The proximity without pressure was its own form of care. The harbor went from gold to rose to the beginning of gray. Hope dropped her stick and reached for it, and dropped it again and this time left it and moved on to something new. Serena reached over and without looking found his hand. She didn't hold it the way she had in the exam room, with the grip of urgency, needing the anchor. She held it the way you hold something that you've decided to keep, loosely, with room in it. He held on. Below them the harbor moved with the patient geometry of deep water, tidal, indifferent, working its way in and out of the rocks with the long rhythm of something that had been doing this since before the town existed, and would continue after it was gone. Above them the sky made its ordinary transition from day into dark. Around them the town conducted the unremarkable business of a Thursday evening in a place that had never asked anything of anyone except to be part of it. Hope turned and looked back at them from the yard. She had her mother's eyes and her father's jawline and the particular look of a 13-month-old who has located her parents and confirmed their presence and is now prepared to continue her work. She looked at them for a moment the way children look at their parents, without the complicated overlay of history, without assessment or calibration, or the accumulated weight of things that happened before they arrived, just the clear, uncomplicated fact of them being there. Then she turned back to the yard. He felt Serena's hand in his. He felt the weight of everything that had happened and everything that hadn't and everything that still required work and time and the kind of patience that was different from waiting, the patience that was active and present and chose every day to show up. He felt beneath all of it the specific ordinary fact of standing on a back step at sunset with the harbor below and his daughter in the yard and the woman he had spent 3 years not seeing standing close enough to touch. Some things didn't have a clean resolution. Some damage left its mark in the structure permanently. You could see where the repair had been made if you looked. He was learning to look, to see the repair marks in himself and in her and in what they were building, and to understand them as proof of something rather than failure of something. The evening came on. Hope finally sat down in the grass, satisfied or tired or both, and looked up at the first stars beginning to show in the darkening sky above the harbor, with the expression of someone encountering something vast for the first time, and finding it, against all expectations, acceptable. Serena watched her. Lucien watched them both. The harbor moved below. The town settled. The night came in from the water the way nights come in along that coast, slowly, without drama, the darkness arriving as a natural consequence of the light having done its work and the world being allowed, finally, to rest.